G'day there guys, it's your Aussie Hubby Markee, back at it again with another AssholeTax video. Now with that said, I want you to sit back, relax, chuck a prawn on the barbie, and get ready for some bloody good content. Now, our first post is by user Abe Froman King Source, titled, Celebrity Chef Ain't Good Enough for Pizza Man. I've always wanted to own my own place, so I could charge jerks, but that may be why I don't own my own place. But this story involves the owner. I worked at a celebrity chef nearly fine dining restaurant on the Las Vegas Strip. We make gourmet food that doesn't always sit well with the proletariat. One night, we were graced by the presence of the famous celebrity chef himself. He mostly did meet and greets, and all the scary chefs went wobbly in the knees when he asked to see what they were cooking. We had a customer complaint come in during this time, and he decided to fix it himself. We sold pizza, but it was gourmet pizza, not Domino's. The complaint was a common one, that our pizza wasn't like they were used to. I knew there was no way to please these low-rent customers, and was interested to see how an elite chef handled them. Long story short, he remade them 2 pizzas by hand. They had no clue who he was and didn't care they could be starring on TV for all they knew. The guy simply complained the pizza wasn't good enough. He wanted a Chicago thin crust pizza, just like national chain makes. We simply couldn't do it made to order. You can't just make the pizza dough and oven for thin crust magically change from your standard pizza. The guy turned down the first pizza and the 2 celebrity pizzas. He would have had his meal comped with free dessert if he wasn't such an ass. The celebrity owner basically told him he doesn't know crap for cannolis and he can go to Papa John's for his crap pizza, and kicked his ass out. He then turned to all of us watching employees and said, I own the place. I can do that. Don't you ever bloody do that. What national chain does Chicago thin crust? No idea. He was just asking for a particular style of pizza that we couldn't do, and sent 3 pizzas back for not being the specialty that he wanted. It happened all the time. If you're not used to gourmet pizza, you might think it's bunk. This was 20 years ago. Maybe he wanted stuffed crust from Little Caesars or wherever. Whenever I think of gourmet pizza, I think about thin crust like Neapolitan-style thin crust, where it's almost cracker thin and crispy crunchy. On the other extreme of that, I know a girl actually from Italy that makes homemade pizza that she calls pillow pizza because the crust is thick and chewy, like biting into a pillow. Chicago does have its own style of thin crust, but all the chains within it are local. I don't know of any national chains that have Chicago thin crust. Fun fact, Little Caesars is Detroit-style pizza. I know too much about pizza. Was the celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay? Actually, it was DR, David Robbins, who runs Wolfgang Puck's 5 Vegas restaurants. No idea why I'm still scared to say his name. For some reason, Wolfgang sounds like a name of a 90s gang that would slick their hair back. It does sound scary to say, lol. Also, who complains about pizza? That crap's my favorite. Our next post is by user Linden the Wog 97, titled, Stuck-up millionaire who owes that whole town money gets what's coming. Let me start this post by saying that this story doesn't involve me in any way. It's about the guy who used to own my parents' property. Let's call him Greg. All you need to know about Greg is that he is a stuck-up millionaire who thinks he's so perfect and spiritual, but never pays anyone, whether he gets a loan from the bank, a friend, or someone did work for him. Like, seriously, I could write so many stories about this guy on Reddit from what people have told me, so please let me know if you would like more about him. Anyway, on to the revenge. One of the people Greg owed money to was an earth-moving company. 6 months went by and he didn't pay them, so they drove a truck full of dirt and gravel to his house and dumped it onto his driveway, so that no one could get in or out of it. They then proceeded to call the other earth-moving companies in the area, telling them not to go over there, so that the only way anyone could get in or out was if he paid them. And of course, they made him pay everything he owed them before they moved it. Our next post is by user Elephant, titled, It Only Takes One to Tax the Many. I think this sub is the closest for this story. We are a restaurant that had pivoted during this crisis to provide takeout meals. Mostly pasta meals that come in a tin to heat up at home. We basically portion out the meals into the tins, but if there is extra at the end of packaging, we will put the overage into one meal. sort of an end of the batch bonus for random people. At least until someone ordered 2 of the same item and got 1 regular and 1 larger portion. Instead of contacting the restaurants, where we could have explained that their good fortune of getting the bonus package, the customers decided to post on social media that the portions are inconsistent, along with a picture. Please keep in mind that 250 gram weight is labelled on the package, so it's easy to see that 1 was more than it should have been. Anyways, now that the management has seen the post, we are directed to toss out any food that is not full portion size. It's the end of the bonus because of someone who didn't realize the tin was half full, not half empty. That's some pessimism humor for ya. I still distribute the extra at the end, I just distribute it more evenly, despite the fact that I'm breaking protocol. I hate it when people avoid direct confrontation and go all passive-aggressive online to get sympathy likes. Right? If someone says they don't like something, I try my best to fix the situation while I can in the moment. But I swear, people won't give you the chance to fix it because they'd rather play the helpless victim on Yelp. There's a reason that site is named after the sound a hurt puppy makes. Why not politely respond on social media, explaining their good fortune? I think this would be well received by the general public and help to dispel notions of poor quality control. By the way, I completely agree with you about not wasting food. It's a lesson I've been hitting hard with our kids. Do not waste food. Particularly now, with all the difficulties involved in getting food on the table, and all the workers who are risking their health, safety, and life. Corporate, baby, where the human touch withers into dust. What human? I lost my way in office once and accidentally wandered into the floor labelled Higher Management. I was super confused, because all I saw were server racks, and then I realized, AI has been here for a while now. We're just too placated to realize it. Why toss it? If you can't sell it as a portion and are not supposed to give it to a paying customer, why don't you put it on the side for an employee to take home or give it to a homeless shelter/food pantry? I still spread it around. I can't throw away good food any time, but especially now. But that's corporate life. An unhappy guest is a public concern. Keeping everything consistent and not making waves while not mentioning waste is business done behind closed doors. And not just this one place. Our next post is by Indian Joe, titled, How My Boss Saved Big on Printing Supplies. Some time ago, I worked in a small print shop doing big-sized digital prints. Way too long intro. I spent almost 3 months there. To give you an idea of the general atmosphere, there were 7 people working there when I started. All of them have been there since at least 5 years. By the end, 4 of them had quit. The boss tried to get new people to work here, so during these 3 months, I met 4 new hires. 3 of them had quit within 10 days. I was supposed to do 39 hours per week, but never went under 40 and routinely did 45, the maximum legally allowed here. My boss complained about that, telling me that I had better get better at my job and that I was costing her money fixing my daily mistakes in evening overtime. It was actually her official motive for giving me my 2 weeks' notice. The actual motive was that the day before, I left to go home 30 minutes after closure time. The only reason I was late this day is because she was berating me about the excessive overtime I did. I crap you not. She was blaming me for the facts I proved wrong, machine log in hand, and when she refused to accept the proof, I just said, if you don't want to listen to anything, it's useless to try to talk with you. And since I'm exhausted, I'm going to sleep. See you tomorrow in the morning. The next day at 9 AM, she gave me my 2 weeks, and during this 2 weeks, she had me do overtime every day, including this same very day, by giving me extra urgent work to be done by 8 AM the day after, less than 10 minutes before closing time. One of the machines was a 3x2 meter. You can read those measurements. It was a flatbed printer, used to print flat sheets of PVC, dye-bond, aluminium, or anything flat, stiff, and under 10 centimeters, 4 inches thick. These were supplied in 3x2 meter sheets, but were often cut to size with our digital flatbed cutter. Since it can cut any shape, we often cut lettering or logos, and leftover material had fairly irregular shapes. One of our boss's policies was to never thrash any printing material because we can reuse them and save money and the planet. As a result, there were layers of mixed materials stacked on every wall. Last-minute jobs being our specialty, nobody ever had time to sort them out. The actual story. We got a job to do on 3mm thick PVC. It would have required 2.5 sheets. We only had 3 in stock, but the boss wanted to keep 2 for a later job. We could have had extra supplies delivered the next day, soon enough for this later job to be done in time. Instead, the boss ordered me to gather all the 3mm PVC that I could find to see how much we could save. I spent 2 hours rummaging around the shop, measuring and sorting every PVC leftover that I found. I then spent 2 more hours to see how the files to print could fit in all those wacky pieces. But in the end, my boss was happy. We could do the first job with only 1 sheet and the scraps. The morning after, I started printing. It was 55 signs, printed both sides. Since I have to use several leftovers, all of different sizes, the file prep is not as straightforward as usual. I had to manually prep 18 files to print on 9 sheets, instead of just using an automated nesting tool. With a flatbed printer, double-sided is not automatic. You have to be meticulous while preparing the files and while aligning the sheets on the machine. If everything goes well, it can be done in 4 hours. Everything did not go well. When I started using the leftovers, some were too dirty to be cleaned and some looked okay on one side but were scratched on the other. As a result, I had to discard some sheets, but keep them stored anyway because save the planet, and redo some files, taking longer than anticipated. Worse, some were so old they had weirdly off-gassed. This is invisible to the naked eye, but once printed, it would interfere with curing the inks, producing random speckles instead of solid color. Even more time wasted since I had to redo the files for another leftover sheet and reprint. Last but not least, some were from a previous supplier, and while being the right thickness, required different settings with the cutting machine. Of course, you could not tell them apart from each other. This one's had to be redone, reprinted, and recut. I spent only 8 hours this day printing this job, only because it had to be delivered the next day. My boss reluctantly accepted to let me do the last prints on a new sheet and order some more for the second job because it is the only way she could ensure that we would have it done in time. In the end, we used 2 sheets and some scrap, and it took me a total of 12 hours. The PVC sheets cost around €12 per square meter, so around €72 per sheet. My time cost my boss around €50 per hour. In total, it cost my boss around €744 to have this job done. Why is it an AssholeTax? If I had done it efficiently, using the sheets in the stock directly, I would have used 2.5 sheets, and with new sheets, I would have avoided a lot of problems. And I would have had way less work to do on prepping the files and setting up the machine. I could have been done in 3 hours for a total cost of €414. Not counting my co-worker time on the cutting machine, nor the extra ink, even more expensive than the one for your inkjet printer, my boss cost herself €330, and screwed up her margin since the signs were for a friend and she accepted a lower price. Step over dollars, which is your pay, to pick up pennies, the cost of the material. How much per hour does he cheat you on pay that he can afford to waste time? She always accepted jobs knowing we barely had enough time. Here she accepted 2 jobs knowing she had not enough supplies. She combined a piss-poor organizational sense with a micromanaging personality. I don't think it ever dawned on her that more last-minute jobs did not mean more money when it makes overtime skyrocket. Our next post is by Markee, titled, "You want to trespass on my property and call the sheriff on me for target shooting? Prepare for a hefty jerk tax." I own some rural undeveloped acreage that we plan to build on someday. In the meantime, we would camp or drive out and spend the day target shooting. The property is well posted with no trespassing and no hunting signs. The main access is gated with an 8-foot metal gate. There are berms, ditches, jersey barriers, and logs at any point along the 10-mile stretch of road, along where anyone would even consider accessing the property. The neighboring properties have all done the same, so basically there is no easy access on a 30-mile length, and even with all that, people still cut the logs, move the barriers, fill in the ditches to access the property on their quads and dirt bikes. Last weekend, a couple of friends and I decided to go out there and do some short-range target shooting, maybe 25 yards. We are maybe 2 miles into the woods, and suddenly a guy and his 8-year-old come up behind us on dirt bikes, and the dude goes off, yelling at us about shooting and endangering his young child. Remember, we are shooting short-range targets we have set up against a hillside, so no errant bullets whizzing around, and it's my property that is posted. I try to explain he is actually trespassing when he says, "Champ, shut up and let the men handle this." My male friend says it's her property, you need to talk to her. So once again I try to explain to him that he is trespassing. He tells me to frick off and says he's calling the sheriff because we are shooting and we need to stop what we are doing and follow him out to the road to meet the sheriff, because the property is gated. No shit, jerk, I gated it. I said we would not leave, but go ahead and call. So he walked away and called. While he did that, I also called and told the sheriff's department the gate was unlocked and they could drive in, or if they wanted to call me when they get close. They said it would be about an hour and they would come to the site. Now, we had probably a dozen rounds already loaded in 3 handguns, so we figured what the hell. Told the dad we were going to target shoot, and of course he flipped his and called the sheriff again. We'd fired them, and then made sure all the guns that were on the table opened so the sheriff could see that they were empty, and sat there talking amongst ourselves, while that jerk stood with his son. Sheriff shows up, and the guy explains how he and his son ride there all the time. Describes how he cut some logs and used a small Kubota to make an entrance so they could get in. Shows what direction he came from when he rode up, and discovered those dangerous shooters. The officer just lets him talk and writes it all down. Then he comes over to us and I show him my ID and my phone, where I have pulled up the tax records to show I am the owner and this fine gentleman does not have permission to be on the property. The officer goes back over to the man and gets some information for his report, asks if those are the dirt bikes that they were riding, and the guy proudly says yes. Then the officer asks where the helmets are. Guy says he doesn't need them on private property. Officer asks if the guy's bike registrations are current. Again, guy says they don't need to be on private property. So the owner asks who owns the property, and that's when the guy realizes things are not going his way. So far, his AssholeTax has cost him a ticket for no helmet, and a double amount ticket for the kid not wearing one. 2 tickets for unregistered bikes. 2 trespassing charges, a vandalism charge for the work that he bragged about to access the property, and he had to push both the bikes 2 miles out to the road, and then walk another 3 miles to his truck. Plus, whatever the cost is to repair the damage he did, making the access and damages for the trail system that he created. If he hadn't have been a jerk, and I would have just told him he couldn't ride there and blocked his access. As for our illegal shooting, the sheriff complimented me on my grouping, which was nice, lol. This was beautiful. My justice boners are at full mast. Always glad to know I have given a random internet stranger a boner. You're a good man, fella. I like the cut of your jib. How dumb do you have to be to not understand that you can't assert private property rights when you're trespassing? He did a lot of work to trespass, so it didn't slip his mind. Also, the sheriff complimented me on my grouping, which was nice. Sheriff sounds cool, he had to enjoy levying this jerk tax. Sheriff just glad he didn't have to do dead trespasser paperwork. Not just paperwork, he'd need to call the coroner and there'd be at least a couple reports asking questions. What a wonderful example that man is setting for his son. I'm glad you and the officer showed his son how to be an adult. Thank you for helping the next generation. You may want to consider speaking to a lawyer about suing this guy for the cost of the trees that he cut down. Tree law is a big deal, and the cost of those trees could be far, far bigger than you might expect. The r/legal advice subreddit is full of posts about people whose trees were cut down, and some of the judgments are higher than the cost of my home. It sounds like you'd have a slam dunk case against this guy based on what he told the sheriff. Already on it. Called my attorney, and I'm actually meeting a guy from a company that does environmental impact studies out there next week to walk the trails that come from the entrance that he made. He was pretty smart about it because you can't really see his handiwork from the road, and he would park on the other side where it's not posted, so people would think he was riding there. We are going to ask for restitution and/or file a civil suit against him. Mama don't play around. And our last post for the day is by WhoIam69, titled, "A customer gets a $500 tax on an $8 meal." Just found this sub, and now I have the place to share one of my favorite stories. I work at a famous chicken chain that is known for our politeness. At my store, we offer free meals to police officers in uniform who eat in the restaurant. My coworker greeted this customer and asked for his order. He promptly showed what an arse he was by berating her for having to wait in line for all of 2 minutes. He did it so loudly that 3 officers eating lunch heard him. He used very foul language and took 4 minutes to do so before placing his order. Strike 1 for him. He then showed his next move by camping out in a booth and making a mess that I only expect from large families with multiple small children. This included throwing his trash on the floor in plain view of the officers. Strike 2. He then went to his car and started throwing what seemed like an ocean of old fast food wrappers and cigarette butts out of his car into the parking lot. This was strike 3 for him, as this was littering. All 3 officers went out and made him clean up his mess and wrote him a ticket. Where I live, littering carries a $500 fine, and if he contested it, the judge could tack up to 60 hours of community service. So, this guy ended up paying $508 for his lunch. This man deserves some community service. I'm thinking maybe a week or so cleaning toilets at Chick-fil-A? Chicken place? Nah, just as a former employee of said polite chicken restaurant, their toilets are decently clean. Make 'em clean at taco time or Chuck E. Cheese. This is why I make my kid help me clean up every bit of mess he makes in restaurants. He can't help making messes, he's 5 and utensils are tricky with small hands and poor coordination, but he can be aware of his impact on the world and help make it better. I agree, I show my kids how to clean up and I explain it. I do most of it as the little ones are little, but it's important to teach them. As they get older, it self-incentivizes them to not make a mess. Dealership tried to scam me on my car and gets what's coming. So about a week ago, I was in the market for a new car. I already had a 4-year-old car, so the plan was to trade in my old car and roll over the equity into a new one. I searched online and found the exact car that I wanted, so I called the dealership and scheduled a time for the test drive. After the test drive, we began to discuss the financial terms of the new car loan. Always go to dealerships pre-approved, and also the trade-in amount for my old car. Going into my trade-in, I did my homework. I found out that the fair market price for my car was $10,000 private party and around $8,000 on a trade-in. The dealership ran their numbers and came back to me with an offer for $6,400. On the evaluation, they put the lowest trim and options on my old car, while also putting that the car was in fair condition instead of good or excellent, which I can honestly attest to. Obviously, I put up a fight with the offer, and eventually the sales manager came out to explain the low offer, citing COVID-19, his mother's gallbladder, and a bunch of other excuses. I really wanted the new car, so I sucked it up and decided to move forward, as I was still able to roll over a few $1,000s towards my new car. At last, the contract signing comes around, and I get put with this smooth-talking finance guy, who attempted to upsell me on a bunch of useless warranties that were exorbitantly priced. When I was finally able to look at the contract, the pricing for my trade-in was listed at $7,200, not $6,400. I verify with the finance guy, and he confirmed the $7,200 price. I sign, he signs, and the documents are processed. A few moments pass, and from the other room I hear him talking to the sales manager about how the car pricing was wrong on the contract, $800 my favor. From what I overheard, they listed their internal price on the contract, meaning all the things they told me previously was complete bullcrap and they were trying to stiff me. The finance guy comes back to me and says that the contract was void because the pricing was wrong and that we'll have to fill out a new set of documents. Immediately, I knew he was full of crap. In college, I took an extensive legal contracts course, taught by an attorney, and the one thing that was beat into our heads was the requirement for two parties to make a contract legal, and that it also takes both parties to void a contract. The dealership screwed up, and then tried to trick me into voiding the contract. I simply refused and cited the legal requirements to void a contract. The finance guy then began to argue with me, saying how it wasn't fair to the dealership that I was getting more money for my car, and how I should do the right thing, meaning that I should just bend right over and let them rip me off on my trade-in. Obviously, I refused, and the dealership had no choice but to let me go on my merry way, in my new car with $800 more in my pocket. Unexpressed is by user Slytherin Rabbit, titled, "Put up a noise device to stop teenagers without thinking through the consequences. Good luck going broke." This is about one of those sound devices that emits a high-pitched noise. It's supposed to keep teenagers away from certain areas as it hurts their ears, but older people can't hear it. Apparently, I'm 26 and I can still hear them, so I call BS on that. It hurts, and I refuse to patronize any business that uses them. I grew up in a relatively affluent, northern English village 2 miles walk from a private school. We call them public schools in the UK, which seems to confuse other nationalities. The village had a local shop, which was much more expensive than the Tesco's 10 minutes drive away, but was popular with the locals. Much of their clientele was the locals, which were mostly well-off retired people, stay-at-home mothers and children from the school, many of whom were wealthy Chinese students who thought nothing of spending a load of cash on snacks. My family is moderately well off. I was one of the poorest kids at the school. On nice days, some of us older children who lived in the village, it was a boarding or day school, and about 6 of us teenagers were day pupils who lived in the village, would walk home from school, as it was a lovely walk that took us through the fields and along the riverbank, and this was a low crime area, so our parents allowed this. We would often get a drink and ice cream from the shop on our way past. We stopped doing this when the shop owner, who I shall call Karen, who never had issues with us before, suddenly decided she objected to teenagers, and followed us around the shop to make sure we weren't stealing, and yelled at us for loitering when we stopped to unwrap our ice lollies, and put the wrapping in the bin outside the shop. So we decided if she didn't want us in her shop, we wouldn't go. A few weeks after this, several mothers were surprised to find their young children started crying when they walked past. Their ears hurt and they were too young to articulate this. Others found their dogs wouldn't stop barking in the vicinity of the shop. One of my friends had the idea it was a sonic device when she heard about it and mentioned it to her mother, who apparently confronted Karen, who smugly admitted it. She thought it was very clever to keep teenagers out. There were 6 teenagers in this village. Even if we were being difficult, and we weren't, it was overkill, when she could have complained directly to our parents. It did keep us teenagers out, but this went around the village quickly, like any small community. The mothers whose young children had been reduced to tears were furious. Anyone with a child or dog automatically stopped shopping there to avoid causing pain to the child or dog. I would estimate 75% of the village had a dog and didn't shop there when alone because they were angry at Karen for causing that pain. The woman who lived next to the shop called the police because her children couldn't use their garden as the sound travelled. Karen was ordered to take it down, as the sound reached private property, not because it was causing pain to children, which still bothers me, and she was fined quite a lot. I think it was like £10,000. But this was 10 years ago, and I may be misremembering. I know she didn't take it down when first asked politely, often the first step before police take action, and they had to force her, and then there was some back and forth, but I wasn't privy to the details. The device was gone, but no one went back to the shop. She had been so hostile and smug about her brilliant idea, ignoring complaints from parents and dog owners, that no one wanted to give her money. The shop became a ghost town for a month or so, then she shut down. And then she got drunk and ranted at the town fete about how no one supported local businesses anymore. She was a normal person until this happened though. It's weird. As for the teenagers thing, she had known us for years, so the sudden 180 was weird. I would have blamed the boarding students instead, but they were escorted by a teacher when they came once a week. Edit. In answer to some comments, this didn't happen overnight. There were 3 or 4 days before people realized what was happening, and then another few weeks, maybe a month, before she was forced to remove the device. She was asked nicely first and refused. It took time to get the relevant paperwork to force her to do it. Can't remember the details here. While she insisted she was right. Then at no point did she apologize to the lady next door, and she rather doubled down. All in all, it took around 4 or 5 months for the business to fold. This was not instant. She had time to either explain the sudden 180, if there was a valid reason, or to apologize. Edit 2. Yes, in British English, public and private schools are the same thing. What the Americans call public school, we call state schools. I googled it. Apparently it was because the public name refers to the school's origins, as schools open to any public citizen who could afford to pay the fees. They are not funded from public taxes. It's an old thing, but most Brits now use private/public/independent interchangeably when talking about these schools. Edit 3. I mentioned this to one of my old friends, and he reminded me that one of our other friends saw a gap in the market from the students who stopped going to the shop, as their ears hurt, and started bulk buying stuff at Tesco's at the weekend and selling them to the boarding students for inflated prices. Apparently, he made £2,000 before he was caught, and this was 10 years ago. It was also bizarre because the school started taking the boarding students to Tesco instead. They could have literally bought the same food for a third of the price. I've been lucky never to really struggle for money. I've never been super rich, but I've never had to worry about food or shelter or university costs, which makes me luckier than most. But that wasting of money just blows my mind. My dad grew up super poor and built his own business from nothing. He always made my sister and I appreciate the value of things. I have some stories about some of the wealthier boarders that may make good r/entitled people fodder. And our next post is by user MMFQDeath, titled, "Company I used to work for gets hacked for $45,000. So a little background. My last job and I have had some issues in the past. I worked in IT at a family-owned company. A basic rundown of what happened was, my girlfriend had to go to the hospital and we share a car. Something didn't get done the day it was supposed to because of a network outage, and the boss decided that me coming in early the next day wasn't good enough and fired me. Now, when I say I worked in IT, I mean I got paid barely anything. I also worked as a web designer, network security analyst, database manager, sales coordinator, server manager, etc. Although I only got paid $13 an hour. While I was there, the owner expressed concerns about other companies receiving ransom attacks. I told him that there were a few measures we could take, but they would add a cost to our network security budget. This was about a month before I got fired. I met with several companies, made my recommendation, and was shot down on the company I selected as the best fit due to cost. I expressed how bad of an idea it could be, and it was still shot down, and we chose a cheaper option. Which was fine because I had other measures in place to avoid it. Now, my boss, the director of IT, is a great guy. However, he's a terrible IT technician. He's always busy, answering emails, never gets anything done on time, offloaded all of his work onto me, and had me doing everything. He had no idea how to use any of the software we bought, no idea how to monitor anything, no idea how to recover from an attack, etc. When I had to leave early to get my girlfriend to the hospital for an extremely painful kidney stone, I told him I would come in 2 hours early the next day and get done before anything was there. He approved it, and I told him if he wanted to do this install, I left everything there and it would take maybe 25 minutes. Prior to this, everything was on hold for 2 days, because our entire network was down due to him causing a loop back on a network switch, which caused errors and threw everything into a panic, which I fixed. As I said, I was let go the next day. This all transpired about a year ago. So today, as I'm still friends with many of the people there, I got told about this hack. It was the exact thing the boss had been worried about. The network was hacked, all of the records and backups were deleted, all information was stolen off of the servers, and they were ransomed for $45,000, which they paid because they couldn't fix it. Now, I had offline cloud backups. I had an offline server dedicated to malware removal from networked components, etc. I had it all ready. If my boss would have taken the time to learn it, or if I was still there, I could have at least gotten the data back without paying the ransom, or prevented the attack entirely. It's a terrible thing that happened, but holy crap am I loving it. That is what they deserve. Our next post is by user DJ Osama Spin Laden, titled The Jerk Discount. When I was in high school, I worked as a cashier at a grocery store in a pretty affluent neighborhood. This meant that there was the occasional encounter with miserable, entitled, middle-aged Karens projecting the stress and inner torment of their own midlife crises onto me before they got home, and engulfed the Chardonnay and chocolate I just scanned for them. The store I worked at had a senior discount day on Thursdays, which happened to be one of the days that I worked. One day, I had a woman come through my line who was probably in her mid-50s. She wasn't senior old yet, but she was definitely getting there. She didn't respond to my hello, which I don't really care about anyways. After I scanned her things, I started scanning the stack of coupons that she brought, many of which were expired and wouldn't work. I explained this to her politely, but she wasn't having any of it. In the most awful, nasal, and patronizing voice, she starts going on a rant about how it shouldn't matter. I just got the coupons, and isn't there a way that you can just take it off yourself? My response to that was, of course, no, in the most polite way that I could. She seemed to accept defeat, but she wasn't done trying to make someone's day as bad as hers. She tells me how stupid it is that we have Halloween candy out in late November. It was on clearance, and how much better the other stores in the city were because they wouldn't do things like this, all while angrily referring to the store that I was in as you, as if I was the person in control of these things. She was almost done complaining when I remembered it was Thursday. I immediately typed the code in, and the words senior discount 10% appear on the screen in front of her. Upon seeing this, her expression very quickly changed from that of a smug, entitled narcissist to someone entering the throes of an existential crisis. She turned red in the face as she put her card in and went to grab her cart. I wished her a nice evening, and she left without saying a word. Moral of the story: if you want to exact revenge on a Karen, make them feel old. Our next post is by Cold Snowy Peaked, titled Literal Absentee DIY Landlord Tries to Screw Me Over, Loses Everything He Tried to Game from Me. Once upon a time, when I was young and single and found myself flush with a surplus of cash, I decided to embark upon single male living, and found a townhouse for rent in an HOA community that seemed like a pretty decent deal. It was a separate unit with one level that was theoretically ADA, but never got anyone to rent it. It took me 2 full years to figure out why, and it was the worst absentee landlord in the world. He was headed off to Ecuador to live full-time in this weird yoga retreat thing, and chase after Ecuadorian beach bunnies or something. Imagine every greasy, balding ponytail hippie you ever met, then add complete incompetence to that, and an inherited set of opportunities that he had slumlorded as a living, but sold off except for one unit at this HOA, his own place. Landlord had hired the property management company that managed the HOA property, maintenance, groundskeeping, etc., to rent the place, but insisted on doing the paperwork himself. Since I was the first renter he had had for this particular unit, he had lived there previously and was moving to Ecuador, he approved me, had me hand him cash for the cleaning deposit, warning, sign paperwork, that turned out wasn't the paperwork the management company needed, and then flew to his new home in Ecuador that night. He handed me the key to the townhouse and drove off in a cheap rental car, and the last thing he said to me was, "If there's a problem, I expect you to work it out with the management company. I won't be available for a month or so." At this point, klaxons should have been going off in my head. When I walked into the unit, it was trashed, like messy frat house moved out trash. I called his number, then I called the property management company and said, "This isn't cleaned at all." Back and forth went on for a good while, but it was still a house. I should have walked, but I didn't at that point. Eventually, the management company got him to admit that he left the unit trashed. I wouldn't move in at all. I was able to show the receipt for the $600 cleaning fee he signed hurriedly for and submit that, so they waived the security deposit they would normally have required and said they would require landlord to pay it. So it all worked out. 3 months later, the jerk landlord is back in town to pare down his material possessions, i.e. sell crap he left behind. And wouldn't you know it, the water heater in the unit died. I contacted the management company, they contacted him, and he said, "I'll take care of it." He showed up one day, broke the lock getting in. His rationale was that he owned the place so he could break the lock if he wanted to, without putting a 24-hour notice up that he was going to be working on it. I got a call at work from a neighbor and drove home as fast as I could to find jerk landlord sputtering as the new water heater ruined 2 bookshelves worth of hardback books and rare board games. At that point, I had already called the management company, and they not only had photographs of the jerk landlord's screw-up, but also took him aside and told him I could prosecute him for criminal trespassing. I was furious, but landlord promised he'd get money from his insurance company to fix everything, and I'd get replacements for my stuff. Guess what never happened? I eventually rebuilt my collection, but at that point, I was done with him entirely, and more or less demanded that the property management company be the only ones involved. Oddly enough, they were pretty much on that too. When I decided to move closer to my work, taking me up for an hour to get home driving by car to less than 5 minutes by bicycle, I was torn because frankly, once I'd figured this jerk's modus operandum for the rental, I could do pretty much whatever, so long as he got his check. He never checked email, so if there was an issue, I went through the management company, and inevitably they just said, go ahead and take care of it, busted appliance, etc., and take it off the rent. He always sent screaming emails, threatening to evict me if he didn't get his full rent payment because he had a crappy building. But I was on a long-term lease of 2 years, and had locked in what was then above average pricing for the building, but as it went on was something like 1/3 of the rent in my area for my place. The $200 jump in monthly rent was one thing, but if I was honest about everything, saving $200 a month in rent meant I was spending 2 hours a day in traffic and $150 more in the gas. The new place meant I could walk pretty much anywhere. On top of that, dealing with the jerk landlord over the internet for the past 2 years was too much, and I knew he'd try to jack my rent up $300 above what the place was worth the minute that 2 years was up, which was about what I was going to pay for the new place. And the bastard still hadn't given me the money for my books and games that he had ruined. So I made sure to send in the notification exactly on time as per his instructions to the property management company, who at this point knew me, and knew what was likely to happen when I moved out. And true to form, he did exactly what we all expected him to do. He attempted to claim the cleaning deposit as security, and then said I would have to pay for the damage I caused due to my negligence with the water heater, and pay to have the unit recarpeted. There was no carpet anywhere in the house, because part of the reason he didn't want to pay for cleaning was because he tore up all the carpet from my unit before I moved in, and then decided he could just paint the floor instead. Unfortunately, it was an old hardwood floor and not the subfloor. I had all of his shenanigans documented to a fare thee well. I had signed a document from the landlord along with a signed letter indicating that it was due to his incompetence, as well as the notification and photographs of the damage he had caused trying to fix something outside of his experience. I even had a photograph of him with water spraying him in the face because he tried to solder copper pipe, and when that didn't work, he tried to duct tape it shut. To be clear, I did absolutely no work on his property whatsoever. I called the property management company that he had hired to do all the work, and when he screwed up installing the water heater in my unit and had ruined the carpet as well as a bunch of my stuff, I called his insurance agency because he was living in Ecuador and couldn't be bothered to deal with his properties other than to collect a rent check. So when he pulled his now infamous bullcrap, I was able to trot out all the documentation on the property management company, and I had kept. And I still had a copy of the insurance claim I had filed with the full list of ruined property and the total he signed and dated that he had in fact collected money from. By this time, I had already moved out everything out of the units except for a cheap old laptop, a folding table, a chair I found in the alleyway, and my cleaning supplies. because I was working from home for a week while packing up my crap and moving out. I sent him an email with the management company CC'd, but also CC'd a friend of mine who worked at a law firm at the time, as the front desk receptionist, but the domain was a well-known law firm in my city and had handled the landlord's divorce once upon a time. The email, in legal terms but TLDR, said, "So, should I send this letter of demand to the insurance company? Because I'm confused, and as I recall, you still owe me somewhere between $1,000 and $1,200 in my personal property damages you never paid due to your mishandling of the water heater installation, and thus the full list of other landlord bullcrap. Should I contact your company and insurance agent as per your standing instructions?" 5 minutes after I sent that email, I got a call from the property management company saying that they would take care of everything from that point on, and that if I hadn't heard from them by Thursday, to expect couriered documents on Friday morning. Friday morning, I woke up to a courier hand-delivering me a $4,250 check and an itemized receipt for everything the landlord had tried to screw me over for. It included the cleaning fee, but surprisingly also the standard security deposit and the owed money for damages that he had received from the insurance company but never paid me, and a full refund of my last month's rent. I found out about 4 years later that the HOA had a lien on the property for about a year, but couldn't start foreclosure until I moved out, so they backdated me and refunded my rent check. Turns out jerk landlord was pocketing the rent, but hadn't paid utilities or HOA dues for 6 months, which was handled through property management company. So, the HOA foreclosed on his unit. The property management company got 15%, and the place sold for $600,000 after they hired a condo flipper. I get the impression they were all just sitting there, hovering, waiting for me to hand over the keys to the property management company, and then the minute I was out of the door, they were filing paperwork and lawsuits saying, "Go, go, go, get the renter completely clear of this, no liens, no liens." Because if I could have shown that the owner still owed me any money at all, I could have theoretically tied up the repo of the unit. Jerk landlord tried to sue them, but for some reason didn't want to leave Ecuador. I'd like to imagine it was a warrant for his arrest for insurance fraud, but still. I froze my psycho neighbor out of her apartment. In college, my 2 friends and I decided to find a place together off campus. We found a beautiful 3-bedroom house with surprisingly affordable rent. The basement of the house was listed as a separate apartment, but as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off, we weren't worried, and the thermostat was upstairs. Then, the demon neighbor moved in. From upstairs, we could hear everything. This adult woman would call her mother and scream at her to pay for her cell phone bills and give her grocery money, aka Taco Bell and cheap tequila. She would scream at whatever guy she was sleeping with to bring her meth, and one day she brought home 3 puppies to scream at too. We were terrified of this woman, and the noise was hell. Also, we'd been idiotic enough to sign a lease stating we were responsible for all utilities, period, meaning we were now financing her gas, water, and electric. But with only 2 months left on the lease, we thought we could just ride it out. But then she started smoking, constantly. According to the landlord, she had quit for good when she had signed the lease, but for good only lasted 2 days. Since it was winter, the heat was running nearly 24/7, and the smoke was wafting up from the vents. Our apartment and all our belongings began to reek with smoke. We contacted the landlord because we'd signed for a bloody non-smoking apartment. He told us we lived in a state where you could technically call an apartment non-smoking, even if it shared ventilation with the smoking apartment. Screw you, leasing laws. At this point, my 2 roommates were heading out for a 2-week vacation. They were online students while I was residential, leaving me alone in the apartment with the demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't sleep or eat because my idiotic stomach decided to react to all the secondhand smoke by aching and cramping constantly. After 3 days, I was a little insane. I made a plan. I checked the forecast, lows in the 20s all week. I borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag. I bought one of those ski masks with the holes in it from your eyes and mouth. I got out my stocking cap, my silk long underwear, my woolen socks, and my down parka. I bought tea, hot cocoa, and ramen, and prepared to live off of a diet of hot liquids. And I turned off the fudging heat. Day 1, she's screaming at her mother for forcing her to move into this frozen crap hole of an apartment. Day 2, she's screaming at her boyfriend, or meth dealer, because he won't let her move in with him. Day 3, she's screaming at the landlord about how she's fudging freezing. Day 4, the landlord is at my door. I greet him in full ski mask, parka, stocking cap array, looking like I'm heading out to rob Santa Claus at the North Pole. He asks me if I don't find it a little chilly in the house. I reply, I had found all of that cigarette smoke a little warm. Day 5, she's screaming about the bitches upstairs to anyone who will listen, and I'm sitting upstairs clutching my car keys and my pepper spray with 9/11 typed into my phone. She finally decides she's fudging leaving and moving in with Greg, even though he just got out for stabbing Travis and he lives with that fudging creepy house in the woods with all those jerk-biting dogs. Day 6, she's gone. I silently bless Greg. Moral of the story, there's a bloody reason the rent seems too good to be true. P.S. For those wondering, I did have a friend who worked plumbing stop by to give me some advice about how low I could go before I burst water pipes to hell and back. Jeez, this person evil. You're so evil. Remind me not to move in with them. It's a good mental note here. Alright, game is our next post is by Call Me Swellington, titled The Girl Friday with the PhD Takes Over the Business from Ungrateful Owner. This is a long tale. It is also a textbook case of why you don't abuse loyal associates. So my spouse was the second person hired at a consulting company in a very specialized industry. In her 15 years with the firm, it grew to a respectable 3-office, 8 to 10 employees at each location, entity. She and the owner grew the business on the contacts, expertise, and presentation of my wife, to the extent that my wife's abilities and education were the main reason the new business came through the door. Over the years, her scope of responsibility grew so that the owner was basically 75% absent and mostly unaware of the day-to-day activity. As he got more and more removed from the business, he would make overtures that he would eventually retire and sell her the business. He was so dependent on her income generating that he took out a life insurance policy on her. I did not involve myself too much, but at a major industry party I attended with her, he introduced my wife to the table as My Girl Friday, basically a secretary, which was weird. Over the years, she tried to get an agreement in place to buy the firm, even if it was years away. He always delayed and made promises, but never followed through. I told her, this guy doesn't respect you or your contribution. He will never sell you the business because there is no reason to. He can make more money by stringing you along, and essentially, you are the business. Why would he sell it to you? One day, out of the blue, my wife received a raise and a bonus, a very minor amount of money, and a contract that included a non-compete, non-disclosure agreement. After reading it, she realized that the owner was trying to lock her down from leaving for another firm. She had been getting feelers from other companies. To make things even more suspicious, she received a call from a competitor who said they were in final stages of due diligence and they wanted to meet her. The jerk was selling the company and didn't think to tell her or ask if she was interested in buying it. She ignored the agreement, and there were no other agreements in place. She was totally free. My wife is extremely loyal. She has missed so many special days working for this guy, stuck around when they were wobbly, even skipped paychecks when there were tough financial times. She was furious, the absolute maddest I've ever seen her. We discussed starting her own firm, and I asked, how much business is contractually obligated to stay there if you leave? It turned out that most agreements were either handshake or 30-day at will. I also asked how many would leave with you. She said about 75%, including her biggest source of revenue who didn't even know the owner. In a very short time, my wife took a 3-week vacation. She had months of unused time, during which time she rented an office in the same building and made all the arrangements to set up a new shop. She agreed to leave any and all company property behind and do her best to give the old company no obvious ammo for litigation. She called her clients and said, I'm leaving. If you want to look into relocating your account with my new company, you'll need to quit the old one before we can discuss it. Most understood the implication. While she was on vacation, she received a panicked call from her boss. "We lost XYZ company. Do you know anything about it?" She said, "I'm sorry, but I just sent you an email. I've resigned. All my keys and company stuff is on my desk. Bye-bye." The new firm took basically 90% of the business and seamlessly transitioned into the same company as it was before, but with a new owner. Even most of the office staff would come aboard. Within a year, her old company closed down except for the small office her old boss ran. She sees him once in a while and he just scowls at her. Nice. Alright, our next post is by RK9J, titled, "Slumlord Loses His Business Over $300 Security Deposit." I rented a little house from a man who owned a painting business. The power was off when he came to see the property, but he assured us everything worked, even put it in the contract. The place was dirty and poorly maintained, so we negotiated the security deposit down to $300. Turned out the heat and air didn't work, along with the refrigerator and dishwasher. I asked him to have someone look at them, and he cursed me up and down. He called and left threatening voicemails. He would show up unannounced and let himself in. On one of the visits, I showed him that the crawl space was flooded and was a breeding ground for thousands, if not millions of cockroaches and mosquitoes that would come up through the floor vents. There was absolutely no ductwork, even though he claimed the heat and air worked fine. He accused me of causing the flood myself, even though I showed him the source was a pipe that had rusted through. He refused to address any problems, and said if you don't like it then you can move. You can't pay for a bargain and expect to live in the Ritz. This man was a terrible man in general. Once he hired someone off Craigslist to cut down a tree in the rental property's yard. The man worked literally all day for the agreed $150, cut up and hauled off the tree. He came back that evening, just standing in the yard. I asked if I could help him. He said he was waiting for the owner to get paid. The owner kept replying saying he was on the way, but never showed up. Our neighbor told us he had punched the previous renter in the face and refused to pay him for a day's work for his company. He had bragged about renting to illegal immigrants and not having to do anything because they wouldn't sue. We had a newborn baby, so we called his bluff and agreed to find a new place to live. We left the home in much better shape than we found it. He said he would mail us the security deposit, but never did. He dodged my phone calls until one day he called to say, "You aren't getting it back. You broke the contract when you left early, so go screw yourself." I was really upset because we were new parents and had very little money. That $300 was a big deal to us and a drop in the bucket for this man. He owned an upscale painting business and had 15 rental properties. The next week, I was online leaving negative reviews for his business when I clicked a link and noticed his website's domain had just lapsed. I knew what I had to do. I immediately bought it, then created a homepage with contact info for his biggest competitor. I emailed him from his old domain, asking if he wanted to buy the website for $320. The cost of the security deposits plus the price I paid for the domain. He was irate. He started calling my work, threatening to sue my employer. He even contacted my parents and threatened to sue them. He left a bunch of threatening voicemails for me, saying he was going to beat me up and he knows where I live and he has my social security number. I received emails from several review sites asking if I was trying to update the contact info for the business. He must have used his old domain's email as his contact email. I didn't want to get in trouble for impersonating his business, so I did not respond. The contact info was never changed. I received a few emails from potential clients. I called him and told him about the painting job requests. I gave him the contact info for one of the clients to prove I wasn't just making it up. I told him it was the last time I was going to do that for him and suggested he buy the website back in order to not miss out on any other jobs. He told me he was taking me to court. I told him I had recorded his threatening phone calls and saved all his texts and voicemails. He said he was going to sue me for illegally recording him, which is not illegal in my state. I said, "I look forward to seeing you in court where I countersue and press charges for harassing me." And I hung up. He called me back and cussed me out for hanging up on him. I said, "Call me back when you can speak respectfully to me," and hung up again. We repeated this about 5 times. Each time he was more angry until the last time. He spoke respectfully and explained he hadn't got a single job in months. I suggested he focus more on creating a website to find business. He lost it and cussed me out again. 6 months passed and he still hadn't bought the website from me. I get a call from him begging me to do the right thing and give him the website back. I told him the current price is $350. 6 months later, I get another phone call. I told him the current price is $380. Eventually, he texted me to say, I went out of business. I hope you're happy. I responded, I hear having a website really helps your business. $380 and it's yours. He told me what a terrible person I am and said, calm as a beer. I responded, maybe if you stop trying to rip people off, your karma wouldn't be so bad. That's the last time I ever heard from him. The major business listing site confirmed his business did indeed close. I renewed the domain for another 2 years just in case he was bluffing. A few months later, I drove by his office to see if it was still there. It was empty with a for rent sign posted. I never got that $300 back and spent money on domain registrations, but it was totally worth it. Edit: I removed pricing and domain renewal timeline because I was estimating it and it was bothering people. It was in 2013 through GoDaddy, but if it really matters to you, I can send screenshots of verifying emails, company info, and the domain address. Just message me because I can't post it here, or it would break the rules of not giving out personal info. Wouldn't messaging people break the rules of giving out personal info? I don't understand. Anyway guys, our next post is by Counter Street, titled Height Approved. I originally posted this in malicious compliance, but I think it belongs here too. This isn't my story, but my parents'. It was probably the first time I witnessed malicious compliance, and I still remember it well. It was about 25 years ago, so I was about 8 years old, and we had just moved into a 150-year-old house that was in need of major repairs. My dad, thinking ahead, knew he would need a large garage and workshop to really get started on the renovations properly. On the edge of our yard was an ancient barn that was falling apart, and needed to be torn down. My dad figured this was the best place to build his new workshop, so that was the plan. We had met and were on good terms with all of the neighbors at that point. When the plans for the new workshop were finished, my parents went around to all the neighbors as a courtesy to show them the plans and get their blessings. The neighbors whose property the current barn and new workshop would border, I'll call them the Peters, were concerned about the height. The existing barn was 16 foot high, and they asked if we could only build it 1 story, 12 foot max, as to not block the sun in their yard. Sure, no problem. My parents agreed. They wanted to go for 2 stories for extra storage, but just 1 wasn't a deal breaker. So the old barn was torn down and the foundation laid for the new one. During that time, there was a falling out with the Peters and my parents. I'm not sure what happened, but it turned nasty. One day, my brother and I were playing street hockey, and Mr. Peters came out yelling at us to get off the road, you half-breed craps. My dad is black, so we're both half black. You'd have to earn your place in this town. What's wrong with him? Upon hearing this, my mum had to physically restrain my dad from going over and beating the living crap out of him. Eventually he cooled off and started on his plan. The plans for 1 story went out the window. Soon, the new garage that was only supposed to be 1 story soon gained a 2nd in the blueprints. If they were going to direct racist comments at his kids, my dad would build what he wanted. As the construction started, the Peters came over to ask why there was 2 stories being built and were told to go screw themselves. We didn't hear from them again until the roof started to go on. The bylaws of the township limited all out structures to 24 foot high. The Peters called the township and then a building inspector, claiming that the new garage was over 24 foot high. If it was over height, the entire thing would have to be torn down and rebuilt, costing us tens of thousands of dollars. I remember the Peters standing there, watching the inspector with smug looks on their faces. 2 days later, we got the final report back from the township and inspector, 23 feet 11 inches, just as my dad had drawn up in his new plans. He sent me up on the roof of the garage, just plywood, no singles yet, with some spray paint, and had me write 23 feet 11 inches, height approved, in 2-foot neon orange letters across the entire roof, facing their yard and house. Not only did the garage block all sunlight from reaching their yard, but my dad waited until everything else was done before he shingled that side of the roof. They had to stare at those neon orange letters for almost 3 years. We didn't hear a peep from them for the next 10 years until they moved. Rightio, and our next post is by user MadBruh3991, titled Pastor Lies, Cheats and Steals. He gets exactly what he deserves. If you want to read on YouTube, that's okay with me. You can call me Caldra or OP, as my username is not easy. Thanks, Caldra. Sorry I'm on mobile. Also, I'm sorry, but I need to be very vague about where this happened. That's alright, Caldra. Love you. The cast: Pastor Bob, not real name, Contractor, and me, Caldra, or OP if you want. It's fine with me, Caldra. You Caldra. Setup. I have been a computer technician for more than 15 years. I have worked on all kinds of computers. Everything from tiny point-of-sale computers to large rack server computers. I had been attending a new church to me. I was trying to date a woman there. This church was her idea. That relationship crashed and burned, but that's a different story. Sorry to hear, Caldra. Now, we can start. It was about 5 years ago. I just sat through a long sermon about generosity and giving to those that need help. At the end of the sermon, Pastor Bob asked for an additional donation because the church's roofs needed repairs, and it would cost $20,000. That's right, 20,000 freedom dollars for a new roof. After the service, I'm talking to my date. Pastor Bob walks over to me. I said hi, and he introduced himself. We talk a bit. Pastor Bob asked what I do for a living. I tell him I'm a computer tech with a shop. As I'm telling him, I have a feeling he already knows what I do. Pastor Bob asks me to have a look at his laptop. It's being very slow, so I agree. I turn the laptop on and I hear a clicking noise. This clues me in it's probably the hard drive, but I can still access the data. This is a good thing because it means I can probably recover the data. So I tell Pastor Bob the hard drive is dying and it needs to be replaced. I also tell him I can probably recover the data. Pastor Bob asked how much it would cost to fix. I tell him for most people I would charge around $250. However, I feel I can donate my time, so I would need just $60 for a new hard drive. Pastor Bob agrees, so I write up an invoice. New hard drive, $60, labor, $0, data recovery, $0, and 2 to 4 days for the repair. Pastor Bob signed the invoice, thus I take the laptop to my shop. I open the laptop. HP, why do you use so many screws and clips? I get the hard drive out and connect it to my recovery rig. I set up the recovery to clone the data to a new hard drive, but not the new one for the laptop, a high-end storage drive. I go home after locking up the shop. Next day, Monday, I open the shop and check the recovery rig. It's working, but it will take at least 10 more hours. So I start to work on other tickets. Then at closing time, I lock up and go home. Next day, Tuesday, I've had Pastor Bob's laptop for 2 days. I open the shop and check my recovery rig. Good news, recovery completed 100% data recovered. Report says hard drive developed too many bad sectors. Now I have a choice. I could put a 1TB hard drive for $60 or a 120GB SSD for $60. Or I could pay some money myself for a 240GB SSD for $100. I decided why not, and put the 240GB SSD into the laptop. I then cloned all the data over from the new recovery storage drive to the new 240GB solid state drive. An hour later, the clone is done. So, I check everything, the laptop works great, and is exactly like how it was before the first hard drive had died. Even the logins still worked. Therefore, I call Pastor Bob and tell him his computer is done. He says that's great and he will be there soon to get it. About 45 minutes later, Pastor Bob walks in. I show him his laptop working and much faster. He loves it and signs the pickup form. He then pays me with a check for $60. It's important he paid with a check. I do a bank run on Monday and Friday, so that Friday at the bank I am informed that Pastor Bob's check is void. What? Why? Pastor Bob had placed a stop payment on the check. Consequently, I called him and he ignored my call. I go to church on Sunday. Pastor Bob gives a sermon about not lying. I walk up to talk to him and he avoids me. So I leave and decide I'm going to write it off. I spent $100 and some time to do something nice. A few weeks later, a customer walks in looking for a new computer. To welcome him, I offer him a drink and go over his options. I'm chatting him up and he tells me he is a contractor. He mostly does siding and roofing. He is thinking about offering solar, that's why he is getting a new computer. I ask how much does a new roof cost? He says up to about $10,000. So I ask him why would someone say $20,000? He had no idea. I thought it was strange. I asked about the church. Contractor said it would have been simple and about $5,000, and he could probably do it for less. Contractor buys a nice new laptop. Sorry the setup took so long, the revenge starts now. Something about what the contractor said bugs me later. Why would Pastor Bob lie and say $20,000 for a new roof, and why would he stiff me for $60? I then remember I never cleared the recovery rig storage drive. I check and there it is, Pastor Bob's laptop data. I look around. It's slow and I'm all caught up on repair tickets. Fittingly, I looked around a bit. He had all of his logins stored in a folder on the desktop, including his online dating logins and online poker. Did I ever mention Pastor Bob is married? I start printing his online dating messages. I look back and find Pastor Bob had been adult hugging several women from his online dating. He had been paying for his dates from the church's donation fund. I'm getting angry now. Then I realized he had adult hugged the woman I was dating when I was dating her. Jesus Christ. It was then I decided to break Pastor Bob. I printed out all his dating messages and the women he adult hugged for the last 6 months, except I refused to print the naughty pictures. It was an impressive packet. I then decide I need copies of the packet. Therefore, I order 100 packets printed from a major online printer. A few days later, my order of revenge packets arrived. These revenge packets are amazing double-sided, staple-bound with a cover with Pastor Bob's face on it. Now the conclusion, and I think it's worth it. This church had a calendar of what the sermon might be about. A perfect Sunday was approaching. I go to church that perfect Sunday. I show up a bit late. Everyone is in the church, so I put a revenge packet on each car. I have a few revenge packets that are in yellow envelopes. Fittingly, I put them in the mail. I sent one to all the high-ups in the church, and I sent a special packet with some of Pastor Bob's naughty pics to Pastor Bob's wife. I set the return address to the church. I also emailed a bunch of people the revenge packet from a burner email. A couple weeks later, after I went back to the church, Pastor Bob was gone, so was the wife. Several of the women were also gone, including the one I was dating. I asked one of the important people there what happened. The answer was amazing. I was told about the revenge packet and how everyone had gotten one. The day my revenge packet appeared, the sermon Pastor Bob had given was about the evils of adultery and cheating on your wife. Thank you, church calendar. The fallout. Pastor Bob was fired and shunned. Multiple women from the church have not returned, including the one I was dating. Pastor Bob's wife is divorcing him, and she is the one that owned the house and the cars. No longer Pastor Bob is now being sued by several people, including the one that fixed the roof. He never paid any of them. There were also rumors of a criminal case of embezzlement. No one has seen Bob in a while now. The church might close if they can't find a new pastor, but the church's money is very low. Apparently, he also spent over $30,000 on online gambling. TLDR, Pastor lies, steals and cheats on his wife with multiple women, gets found out and doxxed, gets fired, divorced and arrested, and no one knows I did this to him. Notes because you might ask. It's quite possible that several of the very young children and babies at church were his, but I cannot confirm this. I have no idea where Bob is now. I would think still in jail. Edit, thank you so much for the awards. It's amazing. Alright, that was a sick story. Thank you for that one. I really liked that one. Pro revenge aside, What are the legal ramifications of taking a customer's data and giving it out without permission? I'm all for what you did, but also you don't want to give Pastor Bob a means by which he can come back to you with a lawsuit that you can't win. That is a good question. I see it as when he stopped payment on that check. He voided any privacy protection I would have given. I don't know if that's how the courts would see it or not. Right? If he didn't actually pay for a service, is he still considered a customer? Or did Bob just give his computer and all of his personal information to a guy he knows from church? What are your legal obligations as a professional if you're not being paid for your service? And didn't OP technically pay for that information since he paid $100 for the new hard drive for the laptop? So many questions. Fire me before I quit? I ruin your life. Since I'm still in school, I took a job at a bakery of types which I won't name. The place has bread in the name but also sells overpriced salads and sandwiches. I worked there for close to a year, where I had this boss named Betty. Not her real name, of course. Betty and I didn't get along whatsoever. She had gotten the previous general manager to quit because she had an affair with him and threatened to tell his wife if he didn't leave. He quickly left the job and she was promoted to the position. I didn't like her, but I have to respect the dedication to be the general manager of a small-ass store. When I first started working there, I was respectful, but she would do things that would get on my nerves. For instance, I would clean all the places I would be hired to do, and once I was done and relaxed for maybe 5 minutes, she would run out of the manager's office screeching, "Why aren't you working?" I would tell her, of course, I did my job, and as a cashier, if nobody is there to help, then I didn't have anything to do. She would glare at me, then I would see her accidentally drop an entire pot of brewed coffee onto my freshly mopped floor for me to clean. So I learned quickly to always look busy. Once she realized that I wasn't going to kneel and kiss the ground she walked on, she started dropping my hours. The store ran on a Game of Thrones type politics for who got promotions and raises. Somehow all her friends were managers and would bully the rest of us. She barely was at work. She would drive to my job clock just in case corporate decided to check her hours. So she was essentially stealing hours. When you clocked in, it printed out a small piece of paper telling when you clocked in. She would just drop them on the floor for me to clean up. I usually would pick them up and stick them in a pocket. So this led me to finding petty clock in and out stubs in my pocket at my house. This will be important for later. Did I mention that she was super racist? She was white and most of the staff were my fellow high school peers, who were all mostly people of color. One day at work, she walked out and told us, "When you're on the clock, I own you." When we all reacted to look at her, she backpedaled and was like, "Oh, I didn't mean it like that." This will be important for later. So after a while, I got sick of practically begging for hours, so I went to my current job, but decided I merely wanted to drop my hours, which were already barely a day a week. But suddenly, when I got my new job, she scheduled me every single day of an entire week. She never did that even when we were on semi-good terms. So I obviously told her I had a new job and couldn't do this. After that, I went home and called my friend, who was still working there, to tell him I was going to quit tomorrow. He has a bad habit of putting his phone on speaker when he's cleaning at work, so Betty overheard this, obviously. The next day I walk in and go through the respectful motions of saying, "Thank you for the opportunity," and blah blah blah. Betty let me through the entire speech before she said, "Oh yeah, I was meaning to tell you, you're fired." I was so blindsided and ticked, I cussed her out. My mum raised me to treat women with respect, but this fudging fat overweight hippo-looking tramp ticked me the hell off. She's the type of girl to think binge eating was a personality trait. Calm down, OP. So I left and was mad about being fired before I could quit, but didn't push the issue. I'm only 18 and I already had another job. I wasn't expecting Betty to give me a good reference anyway. I would have completely left it alone if it wasn't for the district manager Ben, not real name, texting me. The revenge. He thought I was still working there, so I explained to him I was fired. He was stunned due to the fact I was a decent employee. He asked why she let me go, and I explained it to him and he was angry. He clarified that she fired me before I quit, and I said yes. He was ticked that she did this, and asked if there was anything else she might have done. I kind of just vented to him for a bit. When I told him about the racist remark, he asked if anyone else would collaborate with me. I forgot to mention that she slowly fired and forced people to quit and replaced them with her friends and family, which, according to company policy, she couldn't do. Something about conflict of interest. Yeah, you don't say. I asked all the people who were working that day if they could, and a few said they would say they did, but one did even better. My one co-worker Andy is convinced he's the next big vlogger, so he always has his phone out or just using audio recording for hours for a chance to catch a funny clip. I've watched his content, and let me just say, it's super cringe. But turns out he labels each recording by the day and times. So when he checked, he found her making racist remarks. I got a brilliant idea, and with my other fired or co-workers forced to quit, we decided to scour Andy's recordings. We found some great moments of Betty saying controversial things or just being nasty. Like once a guest sneezed on the baked pastries, and when a co-worker told her, she laughed it off and said nobody would know. But this wasn't enough for me. I try to avoid conflict, but when I'm in a situation, I'll follow it through. I looked her up on Facebook and found out she was married. Nobody knew this, so when she had the affair with the other manager and basically blackmailed him, she was also married and cheating. I don't think anyone ever cared enough to find out because she was a nasty old lady, so I found the old manager's Facebook and found out he and his wife were separated. Turns out even after he quit, Betty was still trying to blackmail money out of him. When he didn't, she told his wife anyway, causing his wife to divorce him and basically leave him to go back to live with his parents. I did some research, and in my state, blackmail or extortion is a third-degree penalty, which has a max of 7 years in prison with a fine over $10,000 to the victim. So, I told the old manager what my plan was for her. He agreed to call the cops on her, but I asked if he'd wait until I'd finished my part first. He said he would give me a week. So I met with the district manager Ben and showed him all our evidence. The recordings and the written statements from the other ex-co-workers and people who were still working there. I also gave Ben the slips of paper when Betty clocked in, and then left and returned 8 to 10 hours later to clock out. Ben thanked me for the information, and then I left. A few days later, while walking past the store, I noticed it was closed in the middle of the day. I texted a guy who still worked there, and he told me everything. Turns out Ben first checked the security cameras to see if she was there for the full time she claimed to be. Big surprise, she wasn't. So Ben decided to investigate the store's expenses, since if she's lying about her time, what else could she be stealing? He found out she was stealing money from the store. The guy didn't fully explain how she was, but just that she was. Turns out she was breaking a lot of health and safety codes and used the money for repairs and etc. for herself. So she was fired immediately along with all of her minions, and that left barely anybody to run the store. They shut down to clean up the store and fix things she didn't make. So she's out of a job, and Mark told her husband with photo proof, granny nudes, I know, ew, that she cheated on him. But Mark phrased it so it seemed like she still was. So Betty's husband flips out and decides to divorce her, and Betty is the type to post everything on Facebook. So she's begging someone to let her stay, but all of her friends and family totally bailed on her. So she was living in her car, looking for a job. That's when Mark decides to sue her for extortion. So she scrambles to find a lawyer, and to make it even worse, the company decided to sue her for all the money she stole, and plus all the repairs and lost revenue while the store is closed. Betty's life is crap. She had to sell her car for drastically under what it's worth to pay for all the legal trouble. Mark told me bits and pieces of her crying in the courtroom, but not too much. I was never super close with him. Last I heard of Betty is she was living with her sister who definitely hates her. To think she would have just avoided all this if she just let me quit. Edit, I'd just like to answer a few questions most people have had about the validity of the story. First off, I didn't have a good relationship with Betty, so there would be no reason I would even look her up online. Besides, I don't even have Facebook, so I had to actually look her name up to find it. Next is my friend accidentally recording her racist remarks. Don't most of you know that one friend who is sure they're going to be famous or is obsessed with their online image? He's like that, and it gets annoying when he thinks every moment is a photo opportunity. Next is the timeline. Not all of this occurred as quickly as I stated. I had to cut some parts out for the sake of the story. You wouldn't want to read basically a filler arc in a Reddit story, right? I'm guessing Panera Bread was the store? If so, this story is definitely believable. I've known many people that have worked at Panera and the experience is terrible. Panera is losing nearly 100% of its workers every year as fast food turnover crisis worsens. Crisis or fate coming home. You can't treat workers like they do and not expect a crisis. The chickens are coming home to roost for them, and worst thing is, they will get bailed out just like every other big company. The CEO has asked the employees to write/call to their congresspeople to ask for a bailout for the company. Not for the employees, for the billionaire owners. They've been in a freefall of upper management incompetence since the founders sold the company to a holding company built on Nazi slave labor. I did not see this coming. Stop. Unexpressed is by Grape Ice Cream Float, titled, "Faked proof that I had a flat tire so that the lazy people in my group project would have to do the presentation themselves, therefore likely will fail." I'm in a class where a group research project/presentation is a huge chunk of overall points. Everyone knows in group projects that you always have that one slacker who doesn't do anything that you have to compensate for. However, I got stuck with possibly the worst 3 people to be in a project with in the class. I did the entire research, presentation, poster boards, etc., among many other annoying things myself. I tried talking to them and telling them they needed to put in their share of efforts. Ignored. I'd send them tasks to do. Ignored. I'd try to schedule meetings. They'd say they were coming and then leave me alone at the library. This happened from the get-go. It was abundantly clear that they expected everyone else to do the work, but everyone else turned out to just be me. Rule: we couldn't have things 100% memorized word for word, and we couldn't read off of anything. We had to actually know the subject. I was fully prepared to do most of the talking, and even wrote down a small script for them, and told them to know what to say during their part, at the very least. The night before I told them we had to meet or at least go over the whole thing one time. Once again, none of them showed. At this point I'm livid and decide they can just do it themselves, which means they'd get up there, not know a damn thing to say other than the small info I gave them, and they couldn't even bullcrap anything because they did no research. Thing is, if we miss without an excuse, we fail the project. If you have an excuse, you have to have documentation. I commute and live an hour away, so I decide that I'll conveniently have a flat tire right before class. Went out and actually bought a tire so I could have the receipt to prove it. Emailed the professor, who said I can present by myself during his office hours. Turns out they completely bombed, and not only probably failed the project, but since they're bad students, might even make them fail the class. Edited to say, the professor stated at the beginning that we were not allowed to contact him about people slacking in the group and said to work it out amongst ourselves. Said that we were adults and that he wouldn't even respond to emails about it. Had the exact opposite happen to me once. I was in a group with 2 girls and a guy. The project was done over the entire semester and presented in parts. The breakdown is, we pick a country and explore birth, death, and migration rates, as well as the country's economic status and how this affects said rates. The chicks and I did our parts to the best of our ability. The dude pulled no-show moves at every turn. Didn't have a sitter, didn't have a ride, etc. So we went on without him. And we let the professor know that he had contributed nothing and we wouldn't be putting his name on our work. The professor made the guy be his own group and he had to do about 35 pages worth of work on his own, presented over 4 parts. It was satisfying. Did this exact same thing in college. 2 of us did the work, 2 others decided not to participate every step of the way. Day of the presentation comes, the 2 slackers got up to present with us, and the professor told them to sit down. I had emailed to her 2 days before the class and forwarded to her all the communication, or lack thereof, between myself and the two slackers. She gave them a week to come up with their own presentation. They still bombed, and I wore a huge grin the whole time. Our next post is by Mirabelle, titled, Ex found out our baby's name from the local newspaper. A bit of an older story. This happened almost 14 years ago. My now ex-husband worked a 24-hour shift that night, and he didn't come home after his shift had ended. I was very worried. I went to see his workplace, where they said he went home after the end of his shift. His friends knew nothing about him, he didn't answer the phone, I was 9 months pregnant at the time, so you can imagine how upset I was. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, he showed up with a hangover and said he didn't want to be a father anymore. I was shocked. What do you mean? He doesn't want to be a father anymore. We already had a 3-year-old daughter by that moment, who was a genuine daddy's little girl. He said he needed time to figure things out for himself, and that he doesn't love me anymore. I literally collapsed. I called my mother crying, packed 2 suitcases, one for myself and the other for my daughter, and the ex took me to my mother's place. I had time to pull myself together by then, and as he wished, we agreed to take a half-year break. That he still be there for me and the kids. Wrong. A week later, he asked me for a divorce. I did not give it to him. I told him, our children are not guilty of anything, and the smaller one has the right to be born from a legal marriage. 2 weeks after the breakup, I found out he was cheating on me with another woman who also had a husband and a little son. 2 families got broken up at the same time. 3 weeks after the breakup, I gave birth to our second daughter. And she looked just like him. My eyes, but everything else was like him. I cried, because I knew she will never be able to grow up with her dad. I called him and told that the baby was born and I need him to come with me so we can name our baby and get a birth certificate for her. He said no, he's busy being out with his friends partying for a week. I hated him at this point. So I called the local government and asked if I was legally married and wanted to name the child. Would my husband have to be there with me? I was told no, just take the marriage certificate with you and that's enough. Of course you can't do that nowadays, but then you could. And anyone who wants to comment that the baby wasn't his, both our girls are his. I never cheated on him, cheating goes against everything I believe in. The day after I got out of the hospital, I went to name my daughter. But I didn't mention it to him. 3 weeks later, he called me and shouted at me why did he have to read about our child's name in a local newspaper. In our country, the names and dates of births of new babies in smaller towns are put in a local newspaper. I answered him calmly, you didn't have time to come with me. Your friends were more important, so you didn't deserve to know. Before the breakup, he insisted that we only give 1 first name. Our first daughter has 2. Since he didn't come with me to name her, I put 2 first names. He should have come along. His mistake. She was 6 months old when he first saw her, because he did not bother to visit her. Before the divorce, I put alimony on him through court. We signed the divorce papers 6 months later, and it was 4 days after our 4th wedding anniversary. But on our anniversary, I called him and said, "Happy anniversary, a-hole." And a year late, on the 1st of April, I called him again and said that there was a mix-up with the divorce papers. We're still married. He freaked out. He said he didn't want to have a wife and kids and blah blah blah. I told him that, too bad, you have 2 kids till the day you die, but you don't have a wife. April Fools, you idiot. And hung up the phone. It felt great. Edit. Wow. Did not expect this post to go down like this. Have to make something clear. I was 21 at the time, so I was young. Give me a break. What I left out of the earlier was that, just before we split, I always wanted to give 2 first names from the beginning. Our older daughter has 2 names too. He wanted to have 1, and since he made a clear sign that he didn't want to come to the naming, I made my choice. And why was I in a hurry? Because I had no money. I needed to name the child and get a birth certificate so I could apply for the child benefits from the state. Every child gets them when they are born till they are 18 months old. so I could buy food and diapers and all the necessary things. I didn't even have a stroller. A month before the breakup, I gave him $7,000 for a car purchase and a GIL house repair, which the local authority had given me as a pregnancy support for the baby. The usual process in our country by the government. He promised to pay me back in a year, but he didn't. So that's why I made the April Fool's joke. It wasn't my money, the money was meant for the baby. Someone mentioned that he would never get peace from me because I was still bullying him. No, I won't. That's a 1st of April joke, that was the only one and the last one I ever made to him. After that, our communication is civilized. I'll let him know if the girls want to invite him to a school event, or if they want to visit him, or if there's any need for this data, signature to the school, or any other legitimate paperwork. There's quite a bit more, but I'm going to cut it off there and just go to some comments. Did you have 0 red flags before that shift when he ghosted? Was he totally normal? I'm glad you and your girls are good. I mean, we did have our problems, but nothing that major. We were living with grandmother and grandfather-in-law at the time, so when we disagreed on something, we couldn't yell it out. It was very civil, didn't want to upset anyone. Everybody said that we had the perfect marriage. Even grandmother-in-law were in shock when we separated, and ex got a mouthful from grandfather-in-law. Our next post is by Ned Rag B, titled, "A lady almost hit the front of my car trying to pull into a parking spot I was turning into, so I just sat there." So I'm at Costco, in need of dog food, and it's ridiculously busy for a Monday. Barely any parking spots until I spot one at the end of my lot. I make my way down the aisle and am about to turn into the parking spot when a lady runs over the curb and almost hits me to take the spot. Thankfully, I tapped my brakes in time or she would have taken off my bumper. I look up and she is shaking her head and wagging her finger in a no motion at me. What the hell? I was like, okay, I'll just wait for her to back up since I'm obviously turning into the spot. She doesn't. My girlfriend is with me and was ticked that the lady wasn't budging. I gave her my Costco card and just sat in the aisle in a face-off with this lady. She goes inside, gets the dog food, comes back out, and loads up the car. She then pushes the cart into the spot we were waiting for and hops into the car. The look on the woman's face was enough to give me satisfaction for a week. She had to get out and move the cart so she could park once I reversed through the entire aisle. Worth it. Our next post is by user ASDF_27, titled, "I put a fake note on a Corvette's windshield that read, 'Sorry I hit your car, you probably won't even notice the damage,' because it was taking up 4 spots." So, title is fairly self-explanatory, but I'll elaborate. I was trying to find a parking spot at my university. The lot was notoriously crowded, but my campus didn't have a lot of options. While searching, I saw a Corvette taking up 4 prime spots near the front of the lot. After about 10 minutes of waiting/looking for a spot, one opened up towards the back of the lot. Furious at the nerve of the driver being so inconsiderate, I wrote a note saying, "Sorry I hit your car, you probably won't even notice the damage," and left it on their windshield. When I got out of class and was headed back to my car, I saw a very stereotypical college-aged Corvette owner frantically searching the vehicle while yelling into their phone. I don't know who they were talking to, but I feel bad for them having to deal with this person. So my auntie is kind of a ditz and sometimes takes up 2 parking spots because she doesn't pay close attention to the lines. A while ago, she was really confused by a note someone left on her car. It said, "This is not a Ferrari." It was pretty hard for me to choke back a laugh when she told me about it. Oh my god, that's a hard diss. Those are the worst. At least with expensive vehicles, you can understand the motive, but when a crapbox Honda Civic takes up multiple spots, it's baffling. Like when I get stuck behind a muscle car going 5 under the speed limit, all I can think of is, you should have bought a Nissan Versa. Our last post for the day is by user Waffle Raven, titled, "Buried and Gone." I was about 9 or 10 in primary school. There was one kid who was the bane of everyone's existence. Let's call him Jake. Jake was a little crap. He was spoilt rotten and delighted in seeing others miserable. One time when a friend of mine was climbing a tree, he threw a half brick at him and knocked him off. Never got in trouble for this because no adult saw it. Long story short, he's a crap. On one Friday, he was being particularly crappy, basically pulling hair, telling me I'm a sissy for reading books, telling others that they were worthless, and generally being a little crap. So while he was running around causing mischief, I quietly put down my book and went to the storage room. We kept shoes there. Honestly, can't remember why. I think to stop the floors getting scuffed up, but can't tell. And found his brand new, super pricey, stylish shoes. I took one of them, just one, and took it out to the yard. I dug a hole as deep as I could in the sandpit and dumped the shoe in. After burying it, I went back to my book. When my mother picked me up, Jake was frantically looking for his shoe. His own mother hot on his heels, berating him for losing something so expensive. I left. As far as I know, they never found it. Mother lies, takes my money from me, then gets screwed over financially. Backstory. So I'm 19, female, and had only been living with my mother for a good 3.5 years. Was put into foster care at a young age and don't remember living with my mother at all. Before moving in with her, she would tell me how great it would be for me to live there and how I would be treated with respect and yada yada yada. Well, since I started college, things went to crap. My whole life, I wanted to go to college for art, but my mother convinced me that it was stupid, so I chose to go to a business degree. I got into my state's business and marketing honor society during my last year of high school for having a 98 average in all 5 of my business classes. My first semester of college, everything started out fine. Then the end of September hit and I got a reimbursement from financial aid. Let me add, my mother is on SSI for minor disabilities and hasn't worked in the past 18 years. She has arthritis and fibromyalgia, so apparently she can't work. I got public assistance that I never knew about since I was never allowed to do paperwork for anything. I thought we only got food stamps, but apparently she lied and said I was paying a couple $100 for rent so she could get more money. So, she was getting nearly $500 a month for my needs. I never got anything unless it was Christmas, and $350 a month for food stamps. My boyfriend had to buy me food because I was never allowed to eat at home and didn't want to get a $3,000 meal plan on campus. Anyways, I got a healthy $2,000 back from financial aid, which I originally planned on spending on clothes. I hadn't had a pair of fitting jeans since I lived with my mother, a laptop for school, and food. Well, apparently every time I get money, it belongs to my mother. She demanded I give her most of the money, so I spent $1,500 on some jeans for me and a brand new PS4 system, PS Vita, PS Plus, and a bunch of PS4 games for my boyfriend. I know that sounds reckless of me, but he's paid me back for it. She was ticked and belittled me till I gave her the rest of the money for rent and bills and food. She went off and bought her boyfriend drugs. I was mad because obviously that's just not okay. I just pushed through the semester and kinda sucked it up like I usually do. February came along and pretty much the same thing happened. She demanded my $3,000. I got more this past semester because I only had to pay for one textbook, to pay for rent, electricity, the Wi-Fi, food, and everything under the sun. She got mad when I refused to give her more than $350. I went off and spent the money on my anniversary, including outfit, gas, 2 meals, and some gifts. A new phone, my phone barely worked and was 7 years old, and prepaid my phone plan for the next few months. I also bought myself some food for when I was home. She was irate. How dare I spend my money on my boyfriend and not the woman who birthed me? I tried staying away from home as much as possible, driving around with my boyfriend for the most part, but every time I came home I would get yelled at. Well, March was when crap hit the fan. I needed my Medicaid card, they put cash assistance on that card for convenience, and birth certificate for a program that helps people get jobs in the area, and she wasn't having it. Apparently saying I needed them was being rude and disrespectful. I ignored her for the most part and kept insisting that I needed them right away because I had to leave. She gave them to me after half an hour of me telling her I needed to leave and just started yelling at me. So I left for a few hours and I got a call from my caseworker asking when I would turn in the timesheets. I had to get a signature from each teacher stating I was in class to help keep my insurance benefits and food stamps. I didn't know about the cash assistance, and she told me I could lose the cash assistance if I didn't. I asked her what she was talking about, and she told me I got approximately $500 a month to pay for rent and other things I needed. I informed her that I never knew about that, and she was very upset that my mother was using the money on God knows what. She told me to change the pin on my card and not to let my mother touch it. So, I changed the pin on my card, went home, and my room was torn up. My clothes were everywhere, and my old laptop was missing. My Christmas gifts from my boyfriend were gone, and I was very upset. I told my mother that I just wanted my stuff back, and she just threw everything at my door. I started packing my bags because I was done with her garbage. She demanded I give her my Medicaid card back since she keeps everyone else's. She got in my face, threw my glasses onto the floor, tried throwing my new phone, and was just screaming at me till I gave it to her. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, so I panic when someone is even slightly loud. After she went to the store and tried buying something with it, she came home and started shoving me around, demanding I give her the pin. I was just like my father. I was a piece of garbage for buying jeans that actually fit me for once in my life. I was trash for liking the presents I got from my boyfriend and not for her. I got pants that were 2 sizes too big and very low rise for Christmas. Yeah, no, etc., etc. She actually hit me because of it, and hit me till I gave her my pin. So of course, I was dumb and gave it to her. Someone, for some reason, called the cops, and they showed up shortly after, and her boyfriend started yelling at them that I was abusive and manipulative and a pathological liar. I showed them where she hit me, and tried explaining that she took my Medicaid card, but they didn't care. The cops never care because supposedly my mum's boyfriend has put half our local police force into the hospital. After the cops left, my mother said that my boyfriend, who has done nothing wrong and has only been supportive of me through this, was a pedophile. I'm a year older than him. And that he was not allowed to enter the house again. Then she said I had a new curfew of 6 p.m. I had a class that ended at 5, and it took me 2 hours to walk home, so that was stupid. And if I left the house, I was to never return. So I left. My boyfriend took me to a homeless shelter specifically for teens and young adults that were in abusive situations and had nowhere else to go. I got my own apartment, with the potential of getting a roommate at some point, and I honestly have never felt better in my life. The following day, I go to get a new card, and my mother had taken out $260 at 5 a.m. with the help of my older sister. I had $4 to buy food for 2 weeks before I could apply for my own food stamps and cash assistance case. Most of the time, I only had water, and I would eat every 3 days at my boyfriend's house. When the virus hit, his dad refused to let me over, even though he knew what was going on to a certain extent. I didn't eat anything for a week before being able to get food stamps. I wish I had gotten a job, but having 8 classes, one of which was 6 hours a week for a measly 1 credit, took up the majority of my time. The college suggested I withdraw to focus on my mental health. I was afraid of leaving my new place because I didn't want to be attacked by my family or my mum's boyfriend's drug addict friends. I went from seeing my therapist for half an hour every other week to seeing her for an hour every week. She suggested that I cut contact with my mother permanently, even though it meant losing a good $3,000 worth of stuff I bought for myself over the past 12 years. I got paid to babysit and take care of the farm while in foster care. I was so upset about losing all 40 of my stuffed animals. They really meant a lot to me and were the only things there that helped me calm down from a panic attack. I know it sounds immature, but I've had most of them since I was about 8 years old. Then something popped in my head while I was applying for my own food stamps and cash assistance case. The revenge. I realized that I could easily report my mother for welfare fraud. Not only had she been taking my $500 a month, but she had lied and said her boyfriend and her didn't share food and were roommates. She paid to use other people's food stamps, and she has sold her food stamps for cash to buy fast food or drugs. So I did just that. I went to our state's website and reported her for fraud, adding when she took the money from my card at 5 a.m. that one day. I went into detail, gave the exact location of where she did it and everything. I said she used other people's cards all the time, which was very true, and how she demanded my card whenever I had it. A couple weeks later, I get a letter from the Department of Social Services. They accidentally sent it to my address instead of my mum's, thinking she moved along with me. I opened it and read that she was denied public assistance, denied medical insurance, and denied food stamps. She met the requirements for getting them, but because of my report, she lost everything but SSI, as far as I know. What probably helped was that I told the DSS she stole my card and requested a new one, and the lady at the front desk was mortified. I found out she took the money out later when I was setting up the card online and saw all previous transactions for the past year. She's out $850 a month, more than her SSI and out of health insurance, which was paid for by the state, all because of me, and I boasted about it to my therapist. My therapist actually congratulated me because I'm very shy with people, so to report something like that was very unlikely of me unless you got me very angry. Not sure if this was appropriate here, but it took a lot out of me to even be able to do it. Thanks, anxiety. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that post. Our next one is by user CyberChief, titled, "When trying to get your deposit back from your landlord is like drawing blood from a stone." Back in 2018, I had a temporary internship in California at insert large tech company. So I took a recommendation from a friend about a room for rent. It would be living with 5 other people, but otherwise it looked fantastic with spacious common areas, multiple huge TVs, full amenities, community rec center with pool, short drive times to multiple places of interest, and all for $650 a month, utilities included. I contacted the landlord I will refer to as Crappy Landlord, and he seemed fine on the phone. So, I sent him my security deposit to move in a month later. When it came time to move in, I discovered a few caveats that came with this low rent price. The common areas were all dusty, none of the large TVs worked properly. If we wanted access to the rec room and center and pool, we would need to pay the $80 per month membership fee, and all of the short drive times estimated were exaggerated, unless you were speeding at 2 times the normal speed limit. Whatever, it's not the end of the world, especially at the relatively low price. I will survive. But then it got worse in the coming months. Crappy Landlord decided to charge us an extra $20 a month for paper towels and public cleaning supplies. Crappy Landlord only checked the community mailbox once a week when he was in town and refused to trust anybody with the mailbox key. As it starts to roll into the summer, in June, Crappy Landlord decided that aircon cost too much, and we were using too much, so he removed the thermostat from the wall. Okay? One day, some of us tenants confronted him when he was at the house, since Crappy Landlord also slept at the house about 1 day a week, and I'll never forget his words as he rushed out of the house. "It's legal for me to do it, and I don't care since I don't have to live here." Well, sir, screw you. I'm tilted as all hell at this guy's obvious money grab from 6 tenants. Well, it turns out he's right. He legally doesn't need to provide air conditioning, so the next day I purchased a high-end BTU, freestanding portable air conditioner that exhausts out the window. Holy crap, this thing was luxury. Of course, I pumped my room to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, the lowest setting. We have a couple other minor disagreements that wind up with Crappy Landlord texting me that it's fine if I want to break the lease and move out early. Perfect. When Crappy Landlord finally gets a whiff of my aircon setup, he comes to my room to complain about my aircon unit. I reply curtly, "It's legal for me to do it and I don't care since I don't have to pay for electricity." He leaves later and sends me a text. It basically is telling him that he needs to remove the AC unit from the room and pay an extra $100 per month from the time that he installed the AC unit. Screw that guy. Yeah, okay. Unbeknownst to Crappy Landlord, I'm taking his move-out offer seriously, and this whole time, I've been rallying the troops. All the tenants have been very upset about everyone's living situation, so with some minor encouragement, I managed to convince 2 of the other 6 tenants to move out at the same time as me. They were on a month-to-month arrangement, and I finally submit all of our notices of intent to vacate at the same time, barely a week after my previous conversation with crappy landlord. He's ticked. He was just trying to get me out of the house, but now he has 3 rooms to fill instead of just 1. I ask about my legally mandated pre-move-out inspection. In no uncertain terms, he told me to go screw myself. He said he's too busy to perform an inspection. Well, that's illegal, but okay. Time comes to move out. I found another room for rent much closer to the office for only $100 a month more. We all move out and I text crappy landlord about my security deposit. No response. I text again. No response. Okay, I see where this is going. I spend days and days reading the law, compiling evidence and screenshots, and listing the laws that were broken. The smoking gun was the statute that requires a pre-move-out inspection, and a list of things to fix, and itemized list of deductions within 21 days, or else crappy landlord loses the right to withhold any of my deposit. In addition, he would be subject to treble damages if he's found to be acting in bad faith. I text again and again. Holy crap, that's a long text message. It's basically just repeating what was said just before. I give him plenty of leniency, and I even cite laws so I can prove in court that I'm acting in good faith. And crappy landlord intentionally ignored the laws that I made him aware about. Crappy landlord probably thinks I'm a young pushover college student who won't follow through with legal threats. Well, sir, we're going to court because I'm petty as all hell when it comes to people trying to screw me over. I file in small claims for $650 plus treble damages plus court costs. Crappy landlord files a counterclaim for $2,000 for damages to property, claiming I caused flooding and I broke the microwave. Okay, buddy. In response, I gather testimonies from 3 of the other tenants and I build my case into a 40-page packet of evidence, complete with page numbers, a table of contents, and descriptions for every screenshot and photo. I make 3 copies of everything and submit it to the court and the defendant crappy landlord. The court date is set for November, and I leave the state just before Christmas, so just in time to appear in person, since my internship ends and I fly home in December. He starts filing requests to postpone the trial. He cites a doctor's appointment and the motion is granted. Court date is rescheduled for a month later, in December, but still before I fly home. New court date approaches and he files another request to postpone, citing another doctor's appointment. Somehow, that motion is granted as well, and we're rescheduled again to January. Damn, January rolls around, and surprise, surprise, guess who's got another doctor's appointment conveniently on the same exact day of the trial? Denied. The court finally got fed up with his bullcrap and denied the motion because he can't prove he scheduled the doctor's appointment prior to the court date being moved. Well, I'm not in California anymore, I'm across the country on the East Coast. Crappy landlord thinks if I'm no longer in the state, he'll automatically win since I'm not willing to fly back to California. Well, unbeknownst to crappy landlord, California courts offer an option to appear by telephone. Haha. Court day comes and I get the call. I'm sworn in and then connected to the court. I'm given time to present my case. Unfortunately, I didn't prepare a script, so I kinda summarize the events and explain why I deserve money. Then crappy landlord gets time to defend himself and explains his counterclaim. He doesn't prepare anything either, and he ends up rambling about random crap that doesn't help his case at all. For example, he spends a lot of time explaining how another one of the tenants was crappy, and so his behavior was justified. He doesn't even have a sliver of evidence for his counterclaim when the judge asks for it. The judge asks a few more questions and announces that he'll review the evidence and will get the decision in the mail. A couple weeks later, I get the judgment, saying I'm owed $650. Crappy landlord gets nothing. Well damn, no treble damages for me. However, it's just my luck that the crappy landlord is a piece of crap that won't accept defeat. He files an appeal for who knows what. It's granted. Redo trial is scheduled for May 10th. This time, I'm 10 times more prepared. Once again, I'm sworn in and then they connect me to the courtroom speaker. This time I have a hashed out script that I read, making sure to emphasize how often I informed Crappy Landlord of the law, how often Crappy Landlord knowingly broke the law, and how I offered so much leniency and so many opportunities to do the right thing. Once again, Crappy Landlord doesn't prepare anything, but instead rambles on so much that even the judge tells him to get back on track multiple times. Crappy Landlord claims I caused water damage and had to replace all the carpets. The judge asked for an invoice or a receipt. He has none. Crappy Landlord then claims I broke the microwave, so the judge reads him the 3 witness statements that all state I didn't break the microwave. Crappy Landlord says they're all lying. He still has no evidence whatsoever. At this point, the judge clearly sounds done with his crap and says we'll get his decision in the mail, and the call ends. A couple weeks later, I get the judgment, and I'm owed $1,800, and Crappy Landlord still gets nothing. Well damn, would you look at that? His appeal did not quite work out for him. He goes from owing $650 to owing me $1,800. Being the craphead that he is, he files for a mistrial, claiming I was not sworn in and that I lied in my testimony. Denied. Outside of court, Crappy Landlord offers a payment plan of $20 a month, which will take 7.5 years to pay back, or otherwise, he refuses to pay up. Okay, I see how my collecting money is going to be. I figure out he banks at BOA by looking up checks that I gave him for rent, and seeing where they got cashed. I file for a writ of execution that'll allow me to perform a bank levy. It's granted, so I prepare a packet for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and go to BOA to take his money. LASD serves him with papers and orders BOA to freeze his account. After his allotted time, 30 days, to contest the seizure, LACSD seizes his money, plus 10% APY interest, plus sheriff fees. I finally get the glorious check in the mail. 20 months after moving out, I'll probably frame it. Total $1,893.91. Edit. For everyone telling me to cash the check, I already deposited the money into my bank account via mobile and check depositing. Edit 2. Small claims cases are cheap to file. You'll pay about $50 in most states, and it'll be rare to be as high as $100. Plus, the loser that has to pay you back when you win. Edit 3. Tips for situations like this. Find small claims guides. There's a plethora of helpful informations out there because everybody wants you to win. Even the court wants you to win. At least in California, they offer a free, in-person, small claims advisory clinic, where employees advise you and walk you through the whole process. Make sure you know the whole process and what to expect. Document everything. Have conversations through text or email if possible for easy screenshots. Photograph everything, even if you don't think it's important, because the landlord might just claim you damaged it. Do your research on the law. Know what is legal and illegal, and know the penalties for violations. Compile evidence against your landlord, and cite the laws that they are breaking. The easier you make it for the judge to see that you're right, the more likely that they will side with you. Get supporting witness statements. It changes from case to case, from he said, she said, where the landlord is calling you a liar, to a 4v1, where the landlord has to call everybody a liar. Just don't commit hearsay lol. Have them appear in person, or have them sign and submit a declaration. Follow procedures to the T. Last thing you want is for your evidence to be thrown out, because you didn't send a copy to the defendant at least 10 days before the court date. Come to court prepared, and remember the 7 Ps. Proper planning and preparation prevents poor performance. Judges like people who are on top of their crap. If you come to court unprepared, thinking that you can just talk your way to a win, it will be dead obvious. And don't expect the process to be quick. It'll take a while for your landlord to get their comeuppance, but it'll be worth it. At the end of the day, the court wants you to win. It'll just take a while. Wet Afforestation says, "That was amazing. So well written and eloquent. But yeah, karma comes back tenfold, or in your piece of crap landlord's case, threefold, sorry, not treefold, tree law. Way to go sticking it out. I hope he loses his other tenants too." And OP says, "Thanks. Writing was never my strong suit, so that's a very nice compliment. My girlfriend was in the middle of exactly this with the female version of Crappy Landlord in Burbank. We have moved to Portland, and Crappy Landlady has appeared after a number of postponement motions. I hope hers turns out as well as yours does. Also about the story, it was gripping. So many twists. You had me cheering you on. Every so often it felt like you were losing, just to come back and slap him in the face. So yeah, take a poor woman's upvote. The story on how I got promoted to Director of Sales and Sales Recruitment. Now, I've been with my current employer for many years now. Even though I've quit, I've come back to them. My company also had an incentive if an employee comes up with a way to do business better or changes something that has a net benefit to the company, they get a percentage of the increased revenue/profit. Over the years with this company, I have had several major impacts. Well, about a year ago, I was talking to a senior levels manager, let's call him Bob. And Bob was telling me about how the company has been having an issue in recruitment and hiring of new talent for our sales division. Now, I had been in sales before and knew of the pitfalls our structure created and why senior reps would excel and junior reps would get crushed, and had a really good idea on our turnover challenges. Then, one night I had an idea on how to change the sales structure of our company, almost entirely, which would still retain our senior reps, but also make it easier for younger, more junior reps to find success and stability by a result of reducing turnover. I spent a good amount of time designing this plan before I ever presented it to anyone, since this was Bob's area of expertise. After many revisions and bouncing it around my head, I called Bob and I presented my idea to Bob. Bob liked it a lot. However, he had a few minor tweaks, and he brought up concerns company executives would have. I tweaked the plan and came up with rebuttals to those objections, and shared my plan with Bob. I did this several times. I would say though my plan stayed about 90% original. Bob had been with our company for decades at this point, and I've known him for the entire time, so I trusted Bob would be sure to credit me. Considering my name was all over my presentation I sent to Bob, I expect Bob to share in the love with me should there be any. I felt like I needed Bob as an ally to make my idea work, which is why I brought him in my plan. I followed up with Bob and he basically made it seem like my idea was rejected, that the company was going to keep on doing what it's always done. Okay, fine, whatever, crap happens, it's not the first time my idea has been rejected. And cue a few months later, and our new fiscal year is starting, and our CEO calls everyone to a company-wide meeting. And as I sit down to watch, I witness our CEO praise Bob for coming up with a brilliant new sales structure, strategy, and compensation plan. It is my plan with my name removed. The CEO is gushing over how wonderful this idea is, and how he thinks it will benefit us greatly. I'm fudging fuming. Ticked Bob stole my work, put his name on it, and took credit. He violated my trust and lied to me. He told me the company had rejected the idea, yet here I am watching the company implement my idea. I get on the phone with my VP and let loose. Now, my VP, let's call him Tim, is a really good guy and I trust him. Tim is taken aback and says that right around the time I presented my plan to Bob, Bob started presenting to senior management, and it was almost immediately considered a great idea. In fact, Bob knew the company was considering forcing him into retirement because they felt Bob was holding the company back and the company needed to make a change, and this idea saved Bob's job. Now to give you an overview of how in-depth my plan was. It completely restructured compensation plan, completely changed how we present ourselves to new potential hires, completely changed our sales training to be more focused on real-world realities, refined the sales order process to reduce workload and streamline, did all that using current infrastructure. Each step included suggestions on how to implement the change, and Bob oversaw all of this in his current role. I then asked if I could prove that it was my idea, that I had presented it to Bob, and so forth. Now, Bob and I had discussed this over email and Facebook Messenger and another chat app. I went through our emails, Facebook Messenger, and the chat app, and took screenshots, created a PowerPoint which makes it easier to present ideas, and sent it to my VP. 2 days later, my VP called and said I needed to go into a conference call with HR, my VP, and the CEO. In that meeting, we discussed the plan I had created, the collaboration I had done with Bob, and my plan to implement it. Not only that I presented the research I had done, which Bob did not have access to, and justified why my idea was a good idea, the CEO seemed impressed with what I had done and convinced that I was the true creator. I was then asked what I thought had happened, and I straight up accused Bob was stealing my idea and removing my name from it in an attempt to further his career. I was told they would be having a separate meeting with Bob, and after that, they would inform me of any future changes. A week later, my VP called me and asked me if I was offered the chance to implement my plan, would I be willing to do that? This was obviously a promotion, and I said of course. 2 weeks later, I get a call from my VP, telling me he's coming to my location to visit me. He also tells me I should make sure I look sharp and presentable, and I tried to figure out why he was coming, but he wouldn't say. 2 days later, I come into the office, check my email. Now, all big retirements/resignations are announced company-wide. I see an email stating that Bob has retired. What I found strange is the retirement date was effective immediately, and that his replacement will be announced shortly. Generally, there is a time period for a takeover to happen, and the replacement is announced in the email, along with a brief overview of their qualifications. The time for my VP to show comes, and in walks my VP and the CEO. We go out to lunch, and the CEO says, "PJ, I came to visit you because I always think it's best to give people major promotions the news in person. But I'd like to offer you the position of Director of Sales and Sales Recruitment and put you in charge of implementing your idea." To which I accepted, naturally. Then I asked, "Is this why Bob, retired?" To which the CEO smiled and said, "After talking to you and talking to Bob and discussing it among senior management, it was decided that it was time for a change. Time to inject new blood into our organization, and Bob really wanted to start his retirement, so it was best for everyone." I smiled and said thank you. I know perfectly well Bob intended on working until the day he died. Our next post is by user Poor Man's Yacht Club, titled, "The Old Uno Reverse Card." One day I came from work and someone else's car was parked out the front of my house. No matter, I parked outside my neighbor's house. When I wake up the next day and go to my car to leave for work, there's a note tucked into my windshield. I unfold it and it reads, "Do not park here ever again or else," in a font so large it takes up the whole page of paper. I folded it up, placed it in my glove box, and there it sat for nearly a year, until the day he parked out front of my house. I tucked the note he left on his window and went to bed. The next day, as I was enjoying my coffee, I watched his wife go to get in the car and noticed the note. She read it with a puzzled look and quickly turned to rage. I thought she would storm over to ask me about it, but apparently she recognized her husband's handwriting and went to ask him. He had to sheepishly explain to her that he had left it on my car, and she brought him over, tail between his legs, to apologize. We had a beer, and he stared at the floor the whole time. It was cool. Our next post is by user Revolutionary Basil, titled, "Try to elbow your way to the front at a gig? I'll guess I'll just sing to every song." This was a few years ago in Spain. I just happened to find out that one of my favorite bands were playing a gig on the other side of the country from where I was living. As the gig was on my birthday weekend, I figured, why not? So I found someone else who wanted to go. We organized it and all planned for a fun weekend of sightseeing and music. Fast forward to the gig itself. We got there at a good time so we could grab a drink and find a good spot to watch the stage. Just as the band came on, 2 Spanish girls started elbowing their way towards the stage, deciding to stop just in front of me, which was pretty infuriating, as they were also holding their phones up to video the band, blocking my view. Now, I know every song of this band and I have a singing voice like a cat being washed, so I hit upon a perfect revenge. Every time this girl tried to film, I would sing along at the top of my voice. Every damn song. As well as singing along in her ears just for fun. I ended up having a great time when avoiding her elbows, and she has 0 video without my voice in it. Our next post is by Dawana, titled, "The School Counselor Called Me a Liar." This happened about 10 years ago when I was in the 11th grade. I had to make up a 0.5 of a credit for a math class I screwed around in my freshman year. So for the first half of the school year, I made up my credit and was finished with my math class for the rest of the time in high school. At the end of the semester, the school passes out our new schedule for the second semester. Well, they gave me mine and it was missing one of my classes. They didn't bother placing me in another class at all and just left it blank. I had no way of getting home 1 hour early, so I needed another class to fill my schedule. Well, here's where it gets interesting. Well, I went to the guidance counselor to fix this mistake. Well, the only way to see a counselor is to check in at the main desk and wait. Well, my math class was my last period, so I sat in the office until school was let out and went home. Next day, instead of my last period class, I sat in the office until the bell rang. I did this 4 days and went back to my math class and sat there. The math teacher got irrationally angry and kicked me out of class because I didn't belong there. Well, day 5 of sitting in the office, I decided to tell my mother, and my mother's way of dealing with things like this was calling her mother. Personally, I hate my grandmother because she's a mean and hateful person, but it worked out for me this time. She called the school to talk about the 3 different people until she got on the line with my counselor. Well, she called my grandmother a liar and said I've been skipping classes every day. She later called me to the office and showed me her sign-in sheet. She said, "How dare you lie to your grandmother? You never signed my sheet." Well, she showed me a yellow piece of paper and the one I signed was a purple construction paper-like sheet. Well, I told her what I thought about her, and she sent me back to class. My grandmother did not take being called a liar nicely. She knows the head of the school council and called him. From what I heard, she let into him so badly that she called my counselor and just let into her. She called me back to her office a little later and apologized to me and said she would immediately fix my schedule. A whole week after the schedules went out, the head council member said he was tired of her crap and wanted to fire her, but she begged him on the phone. She kept her job for 2 more years after this, and because I didn't need an actual class, they made me an office aide and received 100% A in that class, and watched soap operas with the nurse every day, and hung out with another good friend who was an aide too. Sorry for my bad writing. I went to school in rural Florida. That's swamp country, isn't it? We're swamp people out here. Our next post is by user FutureButterscotch9, titled, "Cheating Boyfriend Betrayed by His Good Christian Sister in the Best Possible Way." This story is now somewhat famous in my circle of friends, and one finally roped me into spilling it on here. Here you go, Evan. This is the tale of myself and this perfect girl named Charlie. Part 1, Exposition. This took place roughly 2 years ago at the twilight of my senior year high school. It was early May, and our graduation was set for early June. So with most of our brains switched to summer mode and our teachers fresh out of screws to give, my friends and I finally fell in line with the majority of our class and started ditching. Our friend group consisted of a handful of minor characters, in addition to my boyfriend of 3 years. Kyle, my best friend since middle school, Sarah, myself, and a recent inclusion, Brad, who, not gonna lie, was and is a bit of a white knight. White knight. Kyle belonged to a Christian family. No, not the nice, charity-giving, actually Christian Christians, but rather the homophobic, slur-singing, will kick a homeless guy in the face and then sit in church, act like a saint Christians. They always went to church every Wednesday and Friday, and while they invited me, I never went, due to being A, an agnostic, B, a closeted bisexual, and C, almost physically sick from their hypocrisy. They never really liked me because of this. They also were entitled. It wasn't evident until they got into trouble. You see, they helped organize the church's funding, grants, donations, charity, maintenance, etc., which put them pretty high on the pecking order. The church, while not the centerpiece of our part of town, still claimed a lot of the district's authority figures as patrons. It was the sort of unofficial institution that sneaks its way into politics without ever being directly involved. So whenever they got pulled over or issued a parking ticket, they would drop a couple names and dodge the whole thing. Kyle himself was decent. I'd known him since elementary school. He was usually nice and he was hot. Shallow, I know, but it was high school. So I tolerated his idiotic and oftentimes narcissistic behavior. They treated him like God's gift to earth. But it was his sister, Charlie, who redeemed the whole family. She was a year younger than I and Kyle, and was the only genuine Christian in the group. However, she also had an impish streak in her that led to some fun hijinks. You could always tell she had a devilish epiphany with this little half-smile that she'd make. We'd often hang out and she was a blast to be around. We were very close and she often confided in me about stuff she couldn't tell her family. To me, a great friend. To them, the perfect little Christian daughter. Sarah was a really good friend who had helped me through the death of my mum. I wasn't diagnosed with depression or anything major, but I loved my mum to pieces and it shattered me. Her and Carl were always there for me and she was the one who pushed me to ask him out. I trusted her about as much as any teen as I could. Anyways, back to the story. One fateful Tuesday, Kyle, Sarah, myself, and our mutual friends headed downtown to get food, skate, and generally do stereotypical annoying teenage stuff. Getting bored of our current activities, I asked Kyle if he wanted to race on our boards to the end of the street. It was just past the lunch rush, so most people were either back in their offices or stuck in traffic. He accepted, and about 30 seconds and a loose flagstone later, I ended up planting my face into the sidewalk and fracturing my arm. I tried to shake it off, but no one else was having it, considering I was walking like a newborn deer and my arm was beginning to swell. We ended up making a visit to the ER, where they confirmed that yes, I did have a fractured arm and a concussion to boot. The concussion was my idiot tax. It wasn't too big of a deal as far as accidents go, but considering my sorry state, they wanted me to stick around so they could do a few more tests, brace my arm, and generally just ensure that I was healthy enough to return to my idiotry. Thankfully, Kyle and Sarah had offered to stay with me, because apparently their parents didn't care and we were already ditching, so school the following day wasn't a big issue. I ended up spending the night in the hospital. The hospital had been understaffed for years, so once your condition was deemed stable enough, they tended to shove you into limbo, and went home the following day with the usual concussion orders. Effectively, I was to become a vegetable for 10 days. Wanting to get back to my recently attained freedom, I complied, meaning I spent about 7 days sleeping and eating. I only picked up my phone after the doctor cleared me, to which I found an unexpected message. Part 2. The Act. Brad had gotten my number from Kyle and sent me a link to a private data storing account, one of those services where you can upload pictures, videos, etc., and lock it behind a passcode for personal use only, and a password. I, being intrigued by this sudden plot hook in my boring life, followed it to find literal gigabytes of pictures, all showing Kyle and Sarah in compromising positions and captions hollering things that were definitely not beneficial to their relationship with the Lord. I'm talking everything from individual nudes taken from the chat of snaps to full-on money shots and everything in between. It looked like an amateur porn album, the most recent of which was dated to, as you probably guessed, that Tuesday evening. Brad explained that Kyle had this whole thing where he'd upload videos of him and Sarah, doing it for his close circle to whack off at. I personally would have simply used Pornhub like a normal human, but Kyle had always been a little self-infatuated, so I wasn't too surprised at this narcissist-level move. Sorry. Brad had apparently just been included and was sickened by the whole thing. For some context, in our 3 years of dating, the furthest Kyle and I had gone was a BJ after a football game that January. He spewed BS about saving it for marriage while dicking down my BFF. I was shattered. The two people I had placed my unconditional trust in had, without my knowing, been taking turns pounding that trust away, all the while being fully aware of their importance in my life. I confronted Kyle about this when we next hung out at his place, and he denied everything at first, said I was being a paranoid tramp. When I showed him the evidence, he involved his parents, who started claiming I photoshopped the photos and videos, and threatened that they would report me for making child porn. Sarah and Kyle had only just turned 18 the past September. Knowing the police would prove me right, but not wanting to tank Brad for possession, our city had been throwing the book at people for this for years, I dropped it and I left. I thought we'd broken up, but apparently his parents insisted we stay together until after graduation to save face with his extended family. Apparently they knew deep down he was guilty, but the usual entitled parent tendencies flared up. Not wanting to make waves yet, I reluctantly complied and began regressing into my earlier negative mental spaces. Part 3. The Revenge. The funny thing about religious families is that they are just as prone to producing LGBT children as non-religious ones. Kyle had avoided the sickness, Charlie hadn't. Not 1 week after our argument, I was at Kyle's house, helping him keep up the act. We hardly interacted, so I turned to Charlie for companionship. This typically happened when Kyle and I would get into fights, as Charlie's chill demeanor and deep concern often led me to confide in her, sometimes with things I didn't even share with Sarah. This being the biggest argument of our relationship was no different. While we were chilling in her room, she started to get really antsy. Her normal bubbly demeanor was gone. Contrary to your typical homosexual, I didn't have a strong gaydar, so I assumed she'd learned of Kyle's infidelity. Well, yes, but actually no. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she had a secret to spill. I wasn't really in the mood for drama or comforting, but it being Charlie, I let her go. In what has yet to be the second biggest surprise of my life, she told me about how she'd been in the closet for years, 14 or 15 when she first started figuring it out, and apparently for a long time she'd been trying to get closer to me because I was the only person she truly felt comfortable around. Her family was almost stereotypically homophobic and really only approved of her church friends. She was jealous of Kyle and our relationship, but thinking I was straight and not wanting to rock the boat, she resigned herself to her angsty teenage heartache. That was until the HMS relationship struck an infidelity iceberg and she figured she could finally shoot her shot. Now, given any other circumstance, I would have said hell no. We'd known each other for over a decade, and I'd been dating her brother for 3 years. It would have been scummy, and Charlie was practically a sister to me at this point. But the blood started rushing and the lizard brain started screaming for payback. I'll spare the details for her privacy, but one woohoo later, and her and I were enjoying the afterglow when the gears really started turning. I felt like crap. I knew what I'd done was wrong, but given my current situation, I frankly didn't care about that. I more so felt bad for Charlie. At the time, my feelings were twisted and painful, and I thought I didn't really like her that way. So I thought I'd just one and done the only non-family member who I still trusted. She caught on to the vibe I was giving off, and ended up talking me out of some bad thoughts while we got dressed and said our goodbyes. We ended up continuing the relationship after that. For her, she finally got to be with her longtime crush, and I got an escape. When the day of graduation came and went, we maintained the charade until both our families, as well as their church group, went over to their place for a massive dinner celebration and commemorative slideshow. Now, I'd known about this event since the fall, and hadn't thought too much into it until the incident. During our fling, Charlie had been pushing me out of my slump and towards thoughts of vengeance. Apparently, her parents had been spreading rumors to their church group that I had been cheating on Kyle, and they were saying that after the dinner, he was going to dump me, in front of an entire crowd that included my family. I didn't really care about myself, but my dad had gotten a lot of flack for remarrying after my mum died. Some of it even came from me, but having the perspective of age and distance, I got over it. I was not about to have him publicly embarrassed by some crapheads who thought they blessed the ground they walked on. Before, it was just petty high school drama. But this was no joke. My dad worked for the district rep's office. The district rep grew up at that church. It was part of his one of the people persona. A few choice words, and my dad's job would be history. Guess Kyle's parents in their malignancy never thought that part through. Or maybe they did, and I'm giving them too much credit. Either way, this was now personal. So, Charlie, being her impish self, began scheming. She was loved by the church group, so it was easy for her to get the role of prepping the slideshow. She even gave a whole speech about how she couldn't wait to finally give her brother and his friends the recognition they deserved. She then began compiling the videos and photos from the Circle Jerk account that Kyle had made. Idiot hadn't changed the password, alongside screenshots of their conversation in a group chat they had. She got those by borrowing his phone, making a call, and sending the screenshots to her phone before deleting them from the message history, and integrated them into a slideshow. It was structured so that a slide would pop up with a bunch of pictures of the boys in question, alongside their favorite Bible quotes. Then the next slide would include the screenshots of their respective conversations and whatever pictures they had listed as their favorites, censored and from after they had turned 18 for obvious reasons. Altogether, this slideshow took Charlie a few days to compile, but not once did she complain or ask for a break. She was on a mission, and alongside being hot in its weird way, it was also shifting my perspective on our relationship. So the night comes, and we're all sitting around the table, making small talk and putting on our best fake smiles. Several church families are giving me smug, "You're gonna get what's coming to you" looks, but I shrugged them off and stuck with my family for most of the night. Charlie and I avoided each other to ensure no one got suspicious. Finally, the moment of truth came. Everyone was called into the backyard, where they had rows of chairs set up in front of a massive projector. Charlie portrayed her best innocent little sister act before starting the soundtrack. The slides began to roll, and people began to gasp and yell in tune to Good Old Days by Macklemore. Seeing the looks on Kyle and his family's faces as they realized what was happening was priceless. In turn, each boy was brought on screen and put on blast, and each time everyone was too busy recovering from the whiplash to stop it. The few that did tried to grab Charlie's laptop, but she quickly scooped it up and ran into the house, locking herself in a bathroom. The projector was wireless. No one thought to turn off the projector. Idiots. Finally, after almost 5 minutes of Bible quotes and nudes, the boy of the hour was put on screen. His quote, Hebrews 13:4, "Give honor to marriage and remain faithful to one another in marriage. God will surely judge people who are immoral and those who commit adultery." It was intended to create the setup for my humiliation. Oh, how the turntables. A handful of videos played showing his 18+ exploits, alongside screenshots of the rows of content he had made, with texts dating back to the summer of 2017, implying the length of his fling. It hurt to watch, but I found my solace in the sweet nectar of vengeance laid before my eyes. Finally came the last slide, a blank white page with a single audio file link. Even I was confused at this point, seeing as audio wasn't included in our plans. Charlie crept back outside and clicked play, and Kyle's parents' voices came screaming through the speakers. Apparently, Charlie had recorded their entire humiliation plan in detail and had added it to the slideshow as evidence of my impending setup. The girl had covered all bases, and when the show ended, she stood next to the projector, beaming that devilish half grin. It took a few seconds for anything to happen. Kyle and his family beat a hasty retreat to the house, but the party being at their place, they had nowhere to go. Several church members conveyed their disgust at Charlie, Kyle, and the boys in equal measure for the event. She ignored them, called out to her parents, and waited for them to peep their heads out. When they did, she quickly planted a massive kiss on my cheek and pronounced herself as gay. Needless to say, that didn't go down well. My parents and I left in a hurry, and Charlie, now deep in crap, came with us. Part 4. The Aftermath. Charlie and I had been dating since. As you probably guessed, her family have cut ties with her, so she ended up crashing at my place. My stepmom wasn't too pleased with how she'd gone about my revenge, but my dad thought it was hilarious. He collected his $20 from my stepmom. They'd had a bet over when I'd come out, apparently, and argued on our behalf for Charlie to stay over. After all, they had an interesting first impression, and there was no risk of pregnancy. To top it off, it was the perfect way for them to spite Kyle's family after they'd trashed my reputation and tried to make me an outcast. He caught some jokes and snide remarks at work for the next few weeks, but given the circumstances and the fact that I was a teenage daughter, apparently we're prone to bouts of roguishness, He got off, no harm. As for Kyle, you say? Well, his family got barred from their church after his collection came to light, which caused them to fall from local grace. They lost the ear of local officials and the various name drops they'd been using to avoid various fines and penalties caught up to them. Last I heard from Sarah, they had moved to the next state over, and Kyle was living sexless in his parents' basement, squeaking by at a community college. Sarah and I made up eventually. It took a lot of apologizing and no small amount of groveling on her part, but not wanting to resent her for the rest of my life, I got over myself and allowed her back in. We're not as close as we used to be, but that trust is slowly growing back. Let's just hope that she keeps her stuff in her pants this time. Charlie and I lived together until I went off to college, where we've been long distance since. She managed to get into a school 2 hours away, so we often spend weekends at each other's dorms, or somewhere in between, doing our typical hedonistic thing. It's taken me some time to fully recover, and as cathartic as our revenge felt, it did little to truly bring me solace. Despite the implications of this story, I had a real deep connection with Kyle, and while it's easy to write off as teenage drama, it still scarred me. My family and Charlie have helped me rebuild. Our relationship may have begun unconventionally, and could certainly be classifiable as trashy, but we don't care. We're happy, and I have a girl who's gone above and beyond for me. Not everyone can say that. The Karen that breeds minion Karens. This all happened around Christmas/New Year's, but I just found this subreddit and am obsessed with it, so now I have to give you my story. My grandparents immigrated to Canada from Italy in the 70s and opened up a restaurant. When they passed away, the restaurant went to my parents. Over the decades, they grew and expanded it. I have been working at the restaurant since I was 15. Over time, my parents got older and eventually retired, becoming snowbirds, go to Florida for the winters. They left the restaurant to me about a few years ago, but still retaining a small percentage of ownership as an additional revenue stream, along with their savings and annuities. Soon as I gained control, I pretty much modernized the old place. Remodeled the restaurant, changed the logo, reached out to local and national papers to put out ads, invited food critics, bloggers, vloggers, etc. It was very slow at first, and I began to worry that the loan that I took out to do all this was the biggest mistake I had ever done, and I ruined 3 generations of my family's business. But eventually it began to work, and a local semi-famous YouTube featured us in one of his videos, and that was the catalyst for more people to come and review us. And eventually we were seeing 5 to 10 times the amount of business we usually get, even if it's a Monday. We became a hotspot for major events, and it wasn't uncommon for a celebrity to come. On those nights, I even arranged for special high-profile chefs to visit and cook for our guests, which cost a fortune. So during the holidays, we were beyond packed. It got to the point where people would have to make reservations in July to get a table in December. This process took years to get to where we are now. When it gets busy, I don't just sit in the back office. I'm on the floor doing whatever needed to be done, even if that means greet people, bussing tables, or even mopping the floors. Other nights when we have high-profile guests or events, I'm in a blazer and am acting in charge too. On one night, a group of 6 women walked in. 5 of them looked like they are still in their early 20s, and the head of the group looked like she was in her mid-20s. Best theory, she was one of the 4 girls' older sisters, or a possible older sorority sister, to incoming college freshmen, maybe. I was greeting at the door. As they were walking up, Queen Bee Karen was telling the baby Karens on how this place is awesome, food is amazing, and there might even be celebrities here. When she came up to me, she told me she needed a table for 6. I replied, "Of course. Can I please get the name on the reservation?" She looked at me and said, "Oh, I didn't make one, but it's okay. The owner is a personal friend of mine. He said he always has 1 or 2 tables that he keeps open for special guests, and said we can have one of those tonight." Now, generally this is true of many high-profile restaurants, and lately I have been doing that as well, but I had no clue who this woman was, and she definitely never spoke to me about any of this. I did get she was trying to get in without a reservation, but she literally picked the worst person she could possibly try and talk to about this. I told her, "I'm sorry, but we cannot seat anyone without a reservation. As you can see, we do not have any seats available." I didn't want to go all out and say that I'm the owner and we have never spoken before, so I never promised you a thing because I didn't want to embarrass her in front of the other girls that she was with. At first, that is. She then went and said out loud to one of the other girls to take a picture of me. She will speak to the owner and make sure I'm either cleaning the toilet or fired by the end of the week. The other girls following her lead were like, "Yeah, kiss your minimum wage job goodbye." I'm not sure if they were in on it with her, but they honestly thought she knew the owner. Queen Bee Karen then went on and said, "Look, you can just give us a table or I can make life very difficult for you. This is not worth losing your job." Constantly pointing, just trying to put me down, saying things like, "Obviously you aren't here because if you were, you would know who I am and never even try to tell me anything other than yes or of course." Constantly trying to belittle me and get that table. At this point, it was a long day for me, and the way I saw it, I had 3 options. 1, tell her I'm the owner and just call her out on all this. 2, just give her the table and let it be. 3, teach Queen Bee Karen and her little minions a lesson. I chose option 3 for various reasons, including some personality flaws I am aware that I have, but I like to think I was at least 50% really wanting to teach her a lesson. I smiled at her, said, "Of course, ma'am. Follow me, please," and I gave her one of the 3 tables we keep open in case a celebrity comes in. Happens from time to time. I told her I apologize for everything, and she's right. It would be simpler just to give her the table. I also told her that first 3 rounds of drinks will be complimentary. I sat them down and personally served them. As they were sitting down, I told them we do need one of your credit cards and IDs just to keep on file, and we will give it back to you before you leave. Queen Karen gave me her cards and told the baby Karen minions that tonight was on her. I took their orders and got them their free drinks, and told them due to how busy we are tonight there might be a delay on the food. All the girls were thinking of and cared about were their free rounds. They ordered their 3 rounds and still no food. They eventually called me and asked me to check in on the whole time, giving me the world's most nasty attitude since even before they ordered. I told them I will check on it, but also asked if they would like any more drinks. They ordered 2 more rounds by the time the appetizers arrived. At this point, they're all drunk. Having done nothing but drink on an empty stomach most of the night, and only having had salads after, as more food arrives, the more drinks are ordered. What these girls never realized was that they are at our VIP table, which alone costs a few thousand just to sit in. But I didn't charge them for that. What I did charge them for was all the super expensive cocktails they had throughout the whole night, except for the first 3 rounds. In addition, the table they were sitting in, as mentioned, was VIP, so the menus were a bit different for ones. They don't say prices on them. Trade secret. And in addition, it had certain higher-end menu options, such as white truffle, black caviar dishes, and especially imported West Coast oysters, among other things. At one point in the night, I was honestly rethinking what I was doing and thought I might be going too far with these poor girls. They might not know any better, but some things reassured me out that night, such as one of the baby Karens asked me if I felt like my life was worthless, since all I ever became was a waiter. Also, one of my other employees told me how they were discussing how to screw with me, to the point that they can just do this whenever they want and I will always know to give them a table. I also overheard them say, "He's cute, but I would never date a waiter like that. He's such a pushover." There were a bunch of comments like that the whole night, so I kept on there with their life lesson. By the end of the night, each girl racked up a bill on the range of $500 to $600 per girl. When I handed Queen Karen the bill of $4,232.23, with tax and tip included of course, I have never seen anyone sober up so quickly. She went from laughing and giggling with her friends to nearly in tears. She called me over instantly and asked if this was some kind of joke. I took the bill, looked it over and said, "Oh, yes, I apologize. I'll get you the correct bill in a moment." Again, she felt a complete sense of relief, thinking she got someone else's bill, called me a frickin' idiot, and went on to talking with her friends. To be fair, I did make a mistake. I did forget to count her 8th order of a dozen oysters that cost about $120 per order, so I gladly just went back and added it to the order. Then I went back to give her the correct bill. She flipped out again, going crazy. I just asked if there was something on this bill that she didn't order. She and the girls, in shock, go over every single line of the bill, including the first few lines that show that they're original 3 rounds which say complimentary. They then took out their phones and line by line went over everything, line by line, for the 100th time, adding everything up. Extremely rattled, Queen Bee Karen simply said, "1 second, I need to use the washroom." Part of me thought that she might just pull a dine and dash and leave the baby Karens with the bill, but kinda low-key, I did in a way remind her that I had her ID and credit card. Without making it obvious, I thought she was going to run out on the bill. 10 minutes later, she comes back with new makeup. Obviously, she had been crying and makes up a whole story on how the food was awful, the drinks were bad, and so on and so forth, demanding that as bare minimum, I should cut the bill in half with the agreement the baby Karens will chip in, even though she initially told them that the night would be on her. Then, as if a light bulb went off in her head, she again mentioned her relationship with the owner, as if it were to give me additional incentive to cut the bill in half. Holding back a grin at this point, I told her no, just no, I can't change the bill. She whips out her phone and shows me a series of texts with someone called My Restaurant's Name Owner, which I pretty much realized was just what she was doing in the bathroom. Probably changed one of the other Karen minions' contact name and deleted previous texts to start this new script. I read them and clicked on contact info and told her that's not the owner's cell number. Her reply was, "Oh, he has multiple phones for business and stuff. Of course you don't know all his numbers." I remember, wow, this girl thought of everything except I'm the actual owner. I told her, how about this? If we call him and he says that it's okay to take 50% off the bill, then I'll do it. Her reply was yelling and screaming over the time where the few remaining customers all began to start looking, and I knew, okay, time to end this. I told her already in a less accommodating voice, "Cut the crap, little girl. You don't even know the owner. You have never been here before, and if you keep yelling, I will call the police." Her demeanor changed, and she was trying to defend herself the best she could. My reply to her weak comeback was, "My grandparents founded this restaurant. My family has been running this place for generations. I have worked here almost my entire life. I am the one and only owner of this restaurant, and I have never once seen you, heard of you, and I definitely never made a stranger I don't know and have never met before tonight any promises." The mini Karens were just frozen and didn't even know how to react. Queen Bee Karen was in tears. I said, "Now, I gave you the table you wanted, one of your specially reserved tables for high-end clients, which I didn't charge you for, and I gave you 3 rounds of free drinks. If you don't pay your bill, I will call the cops and hand them your ID." In tears, Queen Karen signed the bill and the mini Karens took out their purses to give her whatever cash they had, which equaled maybe a couple $100, with a promise to pay her back more. 2 days later, a man walks into my restaurant, fuming, and asks one of the bartenders to speak to me. I was in the back office for a bit, working, so he waited a good half hour for me. He was the Queen Bee Karen's father. She was with him too, keeping her head down. I took them both to my office, showed him highlights of the security cameras, which were especially good quality of audio because they were in the VIP, which we had to keep good records of because we have had other unrelated incidents before. So I showed him most of it, their comments, their orders, their everything. When all was said and done, he stormed out with her and was screaming at her the whole time that they were walking away. Haven't seen or heard from either of them since, but the original bill I gave them, the one that didn't count the $120 oysters, is framed on my desk. Side note, I didn't lose as much overhead on the table and 3 rounds as you might think. The table was originally supposed to be empty, so I didn't lose anything since I didn't expect to gain anything to begin with. And the overhead for the food and other drinks more than covered the loss on the 3 free first rounds. I thought about posting this on Nuclear Revenge, but I read some of the stories there, and I think making this girl pay a few thousand and giving her a life lesson doesn't qualify, for some of the revenge there is life-ending revenge stories, and losses in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. Edit. Jeez. There are some serious Karens DMing me and stuff. Guys, yes, there are posts in my history about questions about a job at a bank. Last year my ex's brother fell on really hard times and he went to live with us for a few months. He also is a Reddit user. He posted when using my PC, which I didn't and don't care about. Choose to believe it or not. Here is my story and enjoy it. Dropping mic, walking away. Alrighty, and our next post is by user Bootleg Moon, titled, How I Made Bratty Thumbelina Stop Flirting with My Boyfriend. So back in high school, I dated a guy who we'll call Jared. After school, Jared and I would hang out at his place with a group of 3 to 5 friends. One girl in our group of friends was interesting. We'll call her Trixie. Trixie was a pretty girl whose entire personality revolved around being cute and petite. Also, despite being in a relationship herself, she was clearly into Jared. She would claim that things were too heavy and ask only him to carry them, comment on how tall he was compared to her, ask him for piggyback rides, just general nonsense that made us both sort of uncomfortable. I wouldn't tolerate this now, but we did at the time because we liked hanging out with her boyfriend. Well, it being that time of the month, I bought a new box of tampons to keep it under the sink. It was one of those variety packages that included different sizes, which is important for later. Later that afternoon, I went to grab one, and I noticed that 6 or 7 of the light tampons were already missing. What the hell? Then I realized Trixie had been going to the bathroom a lot. Being so aggressively petite and adorable, I guess she considered it beneath her to use regular tampons. When we hung out the next day, she finished all of the light ones. I was wondering what she'd do when she approached me off the side and asked if I had any more. I quietly told her, no, sorry, but she could always use a bigger size so she wouldn't have to change them so often. She answered very loudly, looking right at Jared. Oh, I can't use those jumbo tampons like you. I'm way too tiny. What the hell? I guess she thought it would sound sexy or something? So what did I do? I hid the entire box of tampons in his room and replaced it with a box of diaper-thick maxi pads that I only wear to bed. The next time she went to the bathroom, she was in there a long time, probably searching for the tampons that I'd moved. When she finally came out wearing one of the diaper-sized pads, she crinkled like a fudging newspaper wherever she walked. Jared, knowing full well, asked the room at large, "What's that sound?" And she left shortly afterward. She also cold-shouldered me from then on, which was just an added bonus as far as I was concerned. As a cherry on top of the cake, I heard through the grapevine that she gained at least 50 pounds since high school. Bet you don't ask other people's boyfriends for piggyback rides anymore, huh, Trixie? Righto, and our next post is by user GT2810, titled, A company gave out 10,000 flyers that had my phone number on them. So this one happened quite a long time ago when I had my first office job. I did fairly well, and after a while was promoted and got my own room. With it came my own phone line. The day after it was installed, I arrived at work to find the message light blinking. I checked, and the mailbox was full, with 20 messages. Odd, I thought. There must have been some mistake. There sure was. Message after message are from people wanting to book a chalet. While I was still checking the messages, calls started coming in. I'm like, hello. Yes, I want to book a chalet. Do you have one available for this weekend? You have the wrong number. C pauses for a moment. But this is XXX, right? No, this is an office in town. He pauses again. But the number is XXXXXXX. Yes, that is my number. But this is an office. We don't have anything to do with chalets. But I want to book a chalet. We don't do chalets? You have the wrong number? But your number is XXXXXX, right? Yes, it's my number, but this is an office, not XXX. We don't do chalets. So the conversation went, and the moment I hung up, another call came in. and another. I had the phone off the hook all day. The next day, I decided to put the phone back. It rang immediately. Hello? Hello, I want to book a chalet. You have the wrong number. Is this XXX? Yes, that is my number, but this is not XXX. But the flyer has this number, XXXXXX. Flyer? What flyer? This flyer for a special offer on chalets between these dates. So I ended the call and looked for the main line of XXX company. I called them and told them I couldn't do any work because of all the calls that were coming in, because they printed my number on their flyers. So you printed my number on your flyers. My phone is ringing non-stop. I can't get any work done. Well, that's not possible. Do you have a flyer or the artwork? Yes, I'll just have a look and... Yes? Is that number my number on your flyer? Yes. It must be a mistake. Look, I'm sure it is. A big one. What are you gonna do? The flyers have all been handed out. There's nothing we can do. Well, how many flyers were printed? 10,000? They couldn't do anything. They didn't want to do anything. I asked them to pay for changing the line and they refused. They didn't offer anything and even asked me to direct all the callers to them at the correct number. So I started answering all the calls and it took a week, but I told everyone we were fully booked till the end of the promotion. Oh, that's good. And our next post is by user, Yeah, I probably did it. Titled, My Neighbors Partied and Kept Me Awake. I think this fits in petty revenge. Let me know if I am wrong. Years ago, I lived in a classic Southern California apartment complex. The kind that is 2 stories high and all have balconies or porches if you are on the ground floor. At the time, I worked in a grocery store and could have shifts that started as early as 3:30. When I had that shift on weekends, sleep could be hard to come by due to various gatherings around the apartment complex. I usually would not say anything about noise until 11 PM on weeknights and midnight on weekends. A new couple moved in right above us and were incredibly noisy at all times. They hosted a party on Friday and Saturday night. Since they had just moved in, I decided to let it go and not be that neighbor. The next weekend, it happened again, and on Friday night about midnight, I went outside and looked up at the people on the balcony and asked if they could quiet down. They mostly complied and I went to bed. The next night they were at it again, and this time I went out to ask them to be quiet and I got a lot of "screw you" and just go back inside. I did. I figured that I would wait for a better time to actually meet the upstairs neighbors. The next Friday afternoon rolls around, and I can tell they are getting ready to have another party. They see me and start giving me grief and letting me know that I had better not complain, etc. The party wrapped up around 1:30 AM. Saturday night was worse. They were still partying when I left for work, at 3 AM. I heard some parting shots as I walked to my car. I knew I had to act, but I did not know how. Then, slowly, a plan emerged and I knew what I was going to do. I baked cupcakes for the new neighbors. I waited until Thursday morning at 2:45 AM. I took the plate of cupcakes to the neighbors. I went to the door and politely knocked. The door opened and he was mad. He started to say something and then he looked up. He was about 5'6" and I am 6'1" tall. He was slight and I would probably weigh about 175 pounds. I just put my best neighborly grin on my face and held out the plate of cupcakes. He regained some composure and starts to angrily ask me what I was doing. Then he said my favorite line. "Do you know what time it is? I have to get up for work in a few hours. Frick, you were rude." Once again, I held out the cupcakes and said, "I am so sorry. I just figured that you're always up at this time since I see you every weekend." It was then that it clicked in his feeble mind that what I was getting at. He accepted the cupcakes. I fully thought that I would have to do this again, but he seemed to have learned his lesson. After that, most parties wrapped up by 12:30 AM. Alright, and our next post is by Sumo Ninja 17, titled, Monkey See, Monkey Do. Got to work a couple days and saw that my prime parking spot, right next to the employee entrance, was open. Put on my turn signal and turn into the lane. right next to the spot. The lady in the car next to the spot was loading her trunk with groceries, so I was being careful. Just as I was about to start into the spot, two people walked down the lane between her car and mine, and I stayed stopped to let them pass safely. The lady was done loading her trunk at about the same time. She closes the trunk and looks right at me, making eye contact. She wheels her cart into my space, keeping eye contact the whole time. She puts the cart up against a parking pillar, parked long ways, so there is no way to fit my car into the space with the cart there. She kept eye contact with me until she sat in her car. Game on. I stopped my car and got out. I walked to the cart and turned to make eye contact with her. I then pushed the cart directly behind her car, keeping eye contact as long as I could. I then walked past her door, making her shut it as she was trying to get out to move the cart. I sat in my car and pulled forward and parked. I gathered my work gear and got out. I expected the cart to be behind my car, but I looked up and saw her walking back from the cart corral. She was no longer making eye contact. I thought about making a sarcastic comment, but decided that since she did put the cart away, I should let it go. She was an a-hole, and I was a jerk right back. It was a tie, almost. I did get a little petty revenge out of it. Alright guys, that's the end of today's episode of r/revenge. Tell me what you thought about all these stories down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinions, thoughts, your own stories with it. What did you guys think of all of it? Tell me down below. Anyway, this has been Markee. I hope you have a good day, night, sleep, whatever you've been up to, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!